The sentence reached Beatrice Harrow before the Duke himself did. "She won't last a week here," he said, his voice low enough for courtesy and clear enough for cruelty. Beatrice stood in the shadowed side corridor of Evershade Hall, with her travelling cloak damp at the hem, one gloved hand resting upon the cold brass knob of a door she had not yet been invited to open. She had arrived less than half an hour earlier. Her trunk was still somewhere below stairs. Her bonnet ribbons had been flattened by the Yorkshire wind. No one in the house had asked whether she was tired, hungry, afraid, or brave. Yet already the master of Evershade had measured the whole of her endurance and found it wanting. For one breath, she did nothing. The corridor smelled of beeswax, rain, and old stone. Beyond the wall, a footman's step moved across polished floor, then vanished into the kind of silence only great houses could afford. Beatrice lowered her eyes to her gloves. The right thumb had been mended twice, the stitches neat enough to pass in candlelight, and poor enough to tell the truth in day. Soft women did not repair gloves by a dim fire, because buying new ones would cost a week of meat. Soft women did not leave Bath with 5 coins in a purse, 1 spare gown, and an aunt's careful blessing folded between 2 letters of reference. Soft women did not learn to let humiliation fall without bending to catch it. The Duke's voice came again from the hall beyond. "My mother requires peace, Pritchard." Not another pale gentlewoman with brave references, and no understanding of what this house does to soft hearts. The older voice that answered was grave and controlled. "Miss Harrow comes well recommended, Your Grace." So did the last 2. Her Grace dismissed neither with displeasure. No. They dismissed themselves with tears, dawn departures, and accusations no one could repeat sensibly by breakfast. A pause followed. It had weight inside it. "The house is not cursed, Your Grace," the butler said. "No," the Duke replied. "It is merely honest." Beatrice held still until the little wound inside her steadied into something harder. She had been pitied by cousins, inspected by creditors, advised by women whose charity always arrived wearing gloves. None of it had killed her. This would not either. The door opened before her. Mr. Abel Pritchard stood on the other side, silver-haired, narrow-faced, and so composed that only the faint tension beside his eyes betrayed discomfort. Behind him, across the entrance hall, a man in a dark coat turned from the hearth. Beatrice knew him at once. His Grace Adrian Vale Brooke, Duke of Moorcliffe, looked exactly as a duke should look if one wished to warn young women against hoping too much. He was tall, severe, and handsome in a manner too controlled to be called pleasing. His hair was dark, his mouth disciplined, and his grey eyes held the chill clarity of a winter morning over stone. He did not appear cruel, that was the difficulty. Cruel men were often easier to dismiss. This man looked as if every judgment he made had first been weighed, signed, sealed, and stored among estate papers. Mr. Pritchard bowed. "Miss Harrow, His Grace, the Duke of Moorcliffe." Beatrice stepped fully into the hall. Firelight glanced across the worn edge of her cloak and the plain brown of her travelling gown. Above her, ancestral portraits watched from the gallery, with the calm arrogance of people who had never wondered where next quarter's rent might come from. She curtsied with exact correctness. "Your Grace." The Duke's gaze rested on her face. If he wondered whether she had heard him, he did not ask. "Miss Harrow." His voice was smoother now, but no warmer. "You had a difficult journey." "Long rather than difficult, Your Grace. A generous distinction, a useful one." Something flickered in his eyes, small enough to deny. "My mother is not easily pleased." "Few people worth pleasing are." Mr. Pritchard became very still. Beatrice realized she had spoken more boldly than prudence recommended. Hunger, travel, and insult made poor counselors when combined. Still, she did not lower her gaze. If she began by apologizing for possessing a mind, she would spend the rest of her time at Evershade, trying to fold that mind small enough to fit whatever corner they offered her. "You understand the nature of your position?" the Duke asked. "I am to serve as companion to Her Grace, the Dowager, Duchess. I am to read to her, answer correspondence under her direction, accompany her when requested, and provide conversation when silence proves insufficient. And when conversation proves insufficient, then I hope to have the wisdom to be silent, Mr. Pritchard's mouth gave the smallest possible suggestion of approval. The Duke did not smile. Many people mistake silence for obedience. Many people mistake speech for courage. The words left her before caution could retrieve them. For the first time, Adrian Valebrook seemed not merely to look at her, but to notice her. Not softly, not kindly, attentively. In that attention there was danger, but there was also a strange relief. Being dismissed was familiar. Being seen, even coldly, was not. He turned to the butler. "Show Miss Harrow to the east wing. My mother will receive her at 4. Then to Beatrice, "Evershade is an old house. It keeps inconvenient hours, colder corners, and a memory longer than most people find comfortable. If you require anything, ask Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper." "Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me yet." There it was again, warning under courtesy. The tone of a man who believed himself practical when others might call him unkind. Beatrice curtsied, because dignity sometimes wore the same shape as submission, and trusted the intelligent to know the difference. The Duke gave a brief inclination of his head and walked away through a pair of tall doors. They closed behind him softly, which somehow felt worse than if they had slammed. Mr. Pritchard released the faintest breath. "This way, Miss Harrow." He led her from the entrance hall into a narrower passage that ran behind the principal rooms. The grandeur of Evershade changed there. Marble gave way to flagged stone. The air cooled by several degrees. The voices of the house emerged in fragments. A footman calling for more coal, a maid whispering about warmed linen, a distant bell trembling once and then falling silent. Beatrice gathered her skirts to keep them from brushing the damp wall. "Her Grace's apartments are in the east wing," Mr. Pritchard said. "Your chamber is near enough to attend her, but not within the family rooms. That is appropriate. You will find the household somewhat irregular. Households usually become irregular when people do." He glanced back at her, and this time she was certain of approval. It disappeared almost immediately behind service. "You have a practical manner, Miss Harrow. I have had practical circumstances." They stopped before a narrow door, half hidden by a tapestry, showing a hunting party, faded almost to ghosts, Mr. Pritchard drew a key from his waistcoat pocket. It was brass, old, and cracked near the bow, with a dark line running through it like a healed bone that had never set properly. He placed it in her palm. "This opens the side passage between your corridor and the Dowager Duchess's sitting room. It is not commonly used by guests." Beatrice looked at the key. It was heavier than it appeared. "Am I a guest?" "You are Miss Harrow." It was a careful answer, neither kind nor cruel. "The passage will allow you to reach Her Grace quickly, if she rings. Have previous companions used it?" Mr. Pritchard's silence lasted only a moment. Beatrice heard the answer inside it. "One of them did." "Only one? The arrangement was altered afterward." "I see." She did not see, not yet. But she knew the shape of a withheld truth. It had edges. Mr. Pritchard opened the door. The passage beyond was narrow, lit by a high window at the far end. Dust lay along the skirting where hurried feet had not reached. A faint draught moved through it, carrying lavender, coal smoke, and something sourer like old fear trapped in stone. "Keep the key with you," he said. "And Miss Harrow?" She turned. "Yes, Mr. Pritchard." His face returned to perfect butler stillness. At Evershade, it is sometimes wiser to ask a question twice. The first answer is often meant for the room. Before she could reply, a bell rang somewhere above them. Not loud, not urgent. Still, the sound seemed to pass through the passage like a warning. Mr. Pritchard looked toward the ceiling. "Her Grace is early. Then I should not keep her waiting." Beatrice closed her fingers around the cracked brass key until its edge pressed through her glove. A foolish woman might have taken the Duke's warning as prophecy. A vain woman might have stayed merely to prove him wrong. Beatrice was neither. She needed this position. She needed the wages, the roof, the reference, and the fragile thread of respectability still tied to her name. But as she stepped into the dim passage, Something quieter than pride settled inside her. She would not remain because the Duke had challenged her. She would remain because leaving would please too many people who had already decided she was temporary. Near the turn toward the east wing, she stopped. The sound came again, softer than the bell. A muffled sob slipped through the wall beside a narrow service door, quickly stifled, as if the person making it had learned the cost of being heard. Beatrice stood very still, the cracked key cold in her hand. Then she turned toward the sound. Beatrice did not open the service door at once. A woman who rushed toward every cry soon learned that pain did not always welcome witnesses, and in a house like Evershade Hall, even mercy needed manners if it hoped to survive. She stood with the cracked brass key hidden in her palm and listened. The sob came again, then stopped so abruptly that the silence felt frightened. Beatrice lifted her knuckles and tapped once. "I won't come in unless you ask me," she said softly. The answer arrived after several breaths, thin and rough. "Please don't tell Mr. Pritchard." Beatrice eased the door open no wider than the span of her hand. A maid knelt beside a wicker linen basket, her brown hair tucked badly beneath a white cap, her apron twisted between both fists. On the floor near her knees lay a folded lace shawl, pale cream and far too fine for a servant's passage. The girl looked no older than 20. Fear had made her face seem younger. "It isn't mine, miss," she whispered. "I didn't take it. I found it there, behind the coal screen, and if they say I had it, I'll lose my place." Beatrice looked at the shawl, then at the blackened edge of the coal screen nearby. "What is your name?" "Miss Stand Up, Nell." Slowly, "Leave the shawl where it is." Nell obeyed, though her knees seemed uncertain of their duty. "Lady Cecily's maid said it went missing this morning," she said. Lady Cecily would have any girl turned off without a character if it wasn't found. Without a character. The phrase carried more ruin than dismissal. A servant without a reference could fall through every respectable door in England, and keep falling, long after the people above had forgotten her name. Beatrice understood the terror in Nell's voice because dependents spoke the same language in every rank. "Who told you to come here?" she asked. "No one, miss. I was bringing lavender linen to Her Grace's room. I saw a corner of lace behind the screen." "Did anyone see you bend for it?" Nell swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe Miss Lark did." "Lady Cecily's maid?" "Yes, miss." Beatrice crouched just enough to examine the shawl without touching it. The lace was unstained. No coal dust clung to its edge, though the floor near the screen had a dark smudge where a careless knee or hem would have marked it. A faint perfume rose from the fabric, sharp and floral, not the lavender in Nell's basket. Whoever had placed the shawl there had wanted it found, but had not expected the finder to ask how long it had lain. "You will carry the linen to Her Grace," Beatrice said. "You will not mention the shawl unless asked. If someone asks, you will tell the truth with as few words as possible." Nell stared at her. "They don't like few words from servants, miss. They say it sounds sly." "Then let me sound sly first." A bell rang above them once and then again, sharper this time. Nell flinched. Beatrice turned the cracked key in her hand and felt its old split press through her glove. "Go, and do not cry where a cruel person can enjoy it." Nell gathered the basket and slipped past her with a trembling curtsy. Beatrice waited until the maid's footsteps faded, then closed the door and continued toward the east wing. The passage opened into a small antechamber, hung with green silk faded almost to grey. Beyond it, the Dowager Duchess's sitting room glowed with a fire built too high for the hour. Dowager Duchess Augusta Valebrook sat near the hearth in a carved chair, wrapped in a black shawl that made her face appear both frail and formidable. Age had thinned her skin, but not her gaze. Her pale blue eyes moved over Beatrice's travelling gown, her damp hem, her mended gloves, and the key half concealed in her hand. "You are late," the Dowager said. Beatrice curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace. Most people explain themselves when accused. Most people hope an explanation will improve the accusation." The Dowager's mouth twitched, though not enough to become a smile. "And you do not? I hope useful service will improve the afternoon." The older woman studied her. A small table beside her held a silver handbell, a stack of letters, a pair of spectacles, and a book opened face down in a way that would have offended any careful reader. "You are thinner than your," references suggested. "Paper is generous, Your Grace, and poorer than your handwriting. Ink hides a great deal. Does pride hide the rest?" Beatrice met the question without lowering her eyes. "No, Your Grace. Pride makes poverty less contagious to those who fear it." Silence settled. It was not an empty silence. It had a tension inside it. The Dowager lifted one hand toward the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Miss Harrow. Not on the edge. I dislike women who perch as if waiting to be dismissed." Beatrice sat properly. The warmth of the fire reached her chilled knees, and only then did she realize how cold the passage had been. "My son thinks you will leave," the Dowager said. "I gathered as much. Did he tell you?" "Not intentionally." This time the Dowager did smile, brief and dry. "Adrian was born with 3 virtues and 1 defect. He is loyal, disciplined, and observant. Unfortunately, he trusts his conclusions before he trusts people. That can save a man from fools. It can also make him one." Beatrice remained silent. The Dowager leaned back, the movement small but weary. "You will read to me after tea. Before that, answer a question. What does a companion owe her employer? Honesty without impertinence. Attention without intrusion. Loyalty without blindness." The older woman's fingers tightened once on the arm of her chair. "Loyalty without blindness. That is a dangerous distinction in this house. Then perhaps it is needed." A knock came before the Dowager could answer. Mr. Pritchard entered with the tea tray, followed by Nell, whose face was composed except for the redness around her eyes. Beatrice did not look at her too long. The tray had barely touched the table when a bright voice carried from the antechamber. "Augusta, you cannot mean to hide yourself all afternoon. I brought the shawl you admired, and I insist upon seeing whether it suits you." Lady Cecily Fairborn entered without waiting for permission. She was beautiful in the manner society rewarded most, easily. Fair hair arranged with deliberate softness, pale gloves, spotless, gown the color of early spring water, and a smile gentle enough to pass for kindness at a distance. Behind her came a maid with narrow shoulders and quick eyes. Beatrice knew before anyone spoke that this must be Miss Lark. Lady Cecily's gaze touched Beatrice, paused and cooled. "Oh, the new companion." The words were light, but they placed Beatrice somewhere between a footstool and a vase. Beatrice rose and curtsied. "Miss Harrow, my lady. How formal." "I never remember the names at first. One should not grow attached too quickly." Nell's hand trembled near the teapot. A spoon gave a small betraying sound against porcelain. Lady Cecily turned at once. "Careful, Nell, you have been unfortunate with fine things today." The room changed. Mr. Pritchard's expression did not alter, but Beatrice felt his attention sharpen. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean, Cecily?" Lady Cecily widened her eyes with practiced regret. "Nothing serious, I hope. Only that my lace shawl has disappeared. Lark believes it may have been misplaced by one of the maids." Miss Lark lowered her gaze with theatrical reluctance. "I saw Nell near the side passage, my lady." Nell went white. Beatrice set down her teacup before she could hold it too tightly. "How fortunate," she said, "that the shawl has been found." Lady Cecily looked at her. "Found?" "Yes, my lady. In the side passage behind the coal screen." "How curious, very curious. It had no coal dust upon it." Miss Lark's eyes flickered. Lady Cecily's smile remained. "You examined it closely?" "Closely. Enough to see that it had not lain there long. A bold habit for a woman newly arrived. A useful one when another woman's livelihood may depend upon the truth." The word livelihood landed with more weight than Beatrice intended, but she did not regret it. Lady Cecily's smile thinned. "You speak warmly for servants, Miss Harrow." "I speak carefully of accusations, my lady." The Dowager leaned back, watching as if she had been handed a more interesting book than the one beside her. Mr. Pritchard bowed. "Shall I retrieve the shawl, my lady?" For the first time, Lady Cecily hesitated. It lasted less than a second. "There is no need. Lark may have been mistaken." "Then Nell is not to be blamed," Beatrice said. Lady Cecily's eyes returned to her, soft and cold. How eager you are to arrange the household. The door opened behind her before Beatrice could reply. Duke Adrian stood in the threshold. His gaze moved from his mother to Lady Cecily, from Nell's pale face to Beatrice's still one. What has happened? He asked. Lady Cecily turned toward him with immediate brightness. Nothing, Adrian. A little confusion over a shawl. Beatrice looked at the Duke and understood at once that the room had offered him its first answer. She remembered Mr. Pritchard's warning. The first answer was often meant for the room. Your Grace, she said. The confusion nearly cost a maid her place. His eyes settled on her, colder now with attention rather than dismissal. Did it? Lady Cecily laughed softly. Miss Harrow is very earnest. It's touching, really. Beatrice felt the insult cross the room in silk slippers. She did not chase it. The Dowager lifted her teacup. I find earnestness restful after malice. Lady Cecily's colour changed by the smallest degree. The Duke noticed. More importantly, he noticed Nell's trembling hands and the way Beatrice did not look triumphant. Pritchard, he said, see that the matter is ended without consequence to Nell. Yes, Your Grace. Lady Cecily's smile returned, but it no longer reached even the surface. Of course. No consequence at all. Her gaze rested on Beatrice one final time. In that look there was no raised voice, no open threat, nothing one could repeat without sounding foolish. Yet Beatrice felt the promise inside it. She had defended the wrong maid, found the wrong shawl, and spoken too clearly in the wrong room. Lady Cecily Fairborn had noticed her now. So had the Duke. And in Evershade Hall, Beatrice was beginning to suspect that being noticed was far more dangerous than being ignored. By noon the next day, Lady Cecily Fairborn had made Evershade Hall feel less like a house awaiting a duchess and more like a kingdom already conquered. Her carriage arrived with 2 outriders, 3 bandboxes, a maid carrying smelling salts no one had requested, and a confidence that required no invitation. Within an hour, flowers had been moved from the west drawing room to the dining parlour because she disliked yellow near candlelight. The footman had been corrected on the angle of the silver covers. The housekeeper had been told, with a smile sharp enough to cut thread, that the napery at Fairborn House was folded with greater imagination. Even the great clock in the hall seemed to tick more softly, as if it too feared being found inadequate. Beatrice watched from the edge of the Dowager Duchess's sitting room, while Lady Cecily bent over Augusta Vale Brooke, with affection that did not quite reach her hands. You must come down for luncheon, dear Augusta. Everyone's so eager to see you looking stronger. The Dowager did not look up from the letter Beatrice had been reading aloud. Everyone is often disappointed. Lady Cecily laughed as if this were charming rather than hostile. Then we shall give them practice in disappointment. Her gaze slid to Beatrice. Miss Harrow may attend you, of course. It will be useful for her to observe how a proper table is managed. Beatrice felt the little hook beneath the courtesy. I am always grateful to learn, my lady. How sensible. Some women are clever enough to know what they lack. The Dowager's fingers tightened once upon the arm of her chair. Beatrice saw it. So did Lady Cecily. That was the cruelty of it. She wished her audience to understand. She wished her victim to remain too polite to name the wound. At luncheon, the long dining parlour shone with all the careful beauty of inherited wealth. Silver branches held white candles, though the day was bright. The table was set for 8, with the Marquess and Marchioness of Fairborn, 2 county ladies, the Reverend Mr. Hallam, Lady Cecily, the Dowager, and the Duke. Beatrice counted the places before she was told where to stand. There was no chair for her. A companion might not always dine with the family, but if summoned to attend a frail duchess during a formal luncheon, she should not be displayed like a servant, while addressed like a gentlewoman. Lady Cecily had arranged a more delicate punishment than exclusion. Beatrice would be present enough to be seen, and low enough to be dismissed. Miss Harrow will remain by your chair, Augusta, Lady Cecily said brightly. That way, you may have your shawl, drops, correspondence, spectacles, or moral support at hand. One of the county ladies smiled into her napkin. The Marchioness of Fairbourne gave Beatrice a look of polished pity. How fortunate when a reduced young woman finds a useful situation. The word reduced settled upon the table with a soft thud. Beatrice stood behind the dowager's chair with her hands folded, the mended thumb of her right glove hidden beneath her left. Heat rose up her throat, but her face remained calm. She had been trained for worse by smaller rooms and poorer relations. Indeed, she said, usefulness has the advantage of being less fragile than admiration. The Reverend coughed. The dowager's shoulders moved once, a nearly invisible sign of amusement. Lady Cecily's smile held, but its warmth vanished. One must admire industry, I suppose. Though it is a pity when women must be useful because they cannot be ornamental. The county lady to her right laughed too quickly. Beatrice looked at the painted flowers on the porcelain rim of the nearest plate and gave herself one heartbeat to feel the insult. Only one. Then she let it pass. Adornment is generous calling for those suited to it, my lady. I have always thought a household also benefits from women who can read accounts, remember medicines, calm frightened maids, and distinguish between a misplaced shawl and a planted one. Silence entered the room so swiftly that even the fire seemed to pause. Lady Cecily lowered her spoon. The Marchioness turned her head. The dowager looked straight ahead, but Beatrice saw satisfaction deepen in the old woman's eyes. How vivid your interests are, Miss Harrow, Lady Cecily said. Country houses reveal vivid things, my lady. At that moment, the door opened. Duke Adrian entered with no announcement, beyond Pritchard's bow, and the subtle rearrangement of air that occurred when a man of his rank stepped into a room. He paused just inside, taking in the table, the faces, the empty space where a chair should have stood, and Beatrice behind his mother like an ornament no one wished to admit had spoken. Forgive my delay, he said. His voice was even, Mr. Venn required a signature. The estate steward followed him to the threshold, a narrow man with sandy hair, pale lashes, and a ledger pressed under one arm. Mr. Silas Venn bowed low. His glance moved first to Lady Cecily, then to the empty place where no chair had been set for Beatrice. Lady Cecily did not look directly at him, yet 2 fingers tapped once against the stem of her glass, as if answering a question no one had asked aloud. Beatrice noticed because she had begun to look for the lines between obedience and fear. Adrian noticed because he noticed almost everything once his attention had been disturbed. Venn withdrew only after Lady Cecily's fingers stilled. The Duke moved to his place at the head of the table, but he did not sit. Miss Harrow, he said. Every eye moved to her. Beatrice curtsied as much as her position allowed. Your Grace, are you attending my mother or dining? The question was calm. It was also dangerous. Lady Cecily answered before Beatrice could. Attending, of course. Miss Harrow has been most helpful. Adrian's gaze did not leave Beatrice. That was not my question to you, Cecily. A faint colour touched Lady Cecily's cheek. The Marquess of Fairbourne lifted his brows. Beatrice understood the trap and the gift in the same instant. If she said she was attending, she accepted the insult. If she said she was dining, she accused the future Duchess of discourtesy. She chose neither. I am wherever Her Grace has need of me, Your Grace. The Dowager spoke without turning. I have need of her seated. The silence changed shape. It became less cruel and more curious. Adrian looked at Pritchard. Set another place beside my mother. Pritchard bowed. At once, Your Grace. Lady Cecily's hand tightened around her glass. Adrian, I fear that will crowd the table. Then we shall practice Christian closeness, the Dowager said. The Reverend looked startled to be recruited. Within moments, a chair appeared. Beatrice sat beside the Dowager, with her spine straight and her pulse controlled. She knew better than to mistake a chair for victory. A chair could be taken away. Still, for the length of that luncheon, she would not stand behind a woman's shoulder like a cautionary tale. Conversation resumed in careful layers. The Marquess spoke of a proposed railway spur near one of the Duke's holdings. The Marchioness praised Lady Cecily's taste in Brussels lace. The county ladies measured Beatrice with glances they tried to hide behind polite questions. Adrian said little, yet Beatrice felt his attention move through the room like cold light. It touched upon his mother's untouched wine, Lady Cecily's restless fingers, the sideboard where Ven's ledger had been left for signature, and finally, the frayed stitching at the thumb of Beatrice's glove when she lifted her spoon. She closed her hand beneath the table. Too late, he had seen. "Miss Harrow," he said after the second course, "my mother tells me you read correspondence this morning." "Yes, Your Grace." "Did she terrorize you over commas?" "Only over imprecise ones." The Dowager gave a small sound that might have been approval. "And what did you make of the tenant petitions?" Lady Cecily turned her head. "Adrian, surely estate matters are not luncheon conversation. They are often more nourishing than gossip." Beatrice felt the room waiting for her to fail. She had read the petitions. She had also understood more than anyone expected. The widow at Northfell should not be required to surrender the Southfield before Michaelmas, she said. Her late husband paid the lease through harvest, and removing her earlier would punish her for his death rather than his debt. The Marquess gave a short laugh. A sentimental reading. Beatrice looked at him calmly. "A practical one, my lord. A tenant widow turned out before harvest cannot pay arrears. A tenant widow allowed to gather the crop may pay a portion and preserve goodwill among neighboring farms." The Duke's eyes sharpened. "You consider goodwill an asset. In a country estate, your Grace, resentment is expensive, even when it does not appear in a ledger." From near the door, where he had returned with another folded paper for signature, Mr. Venn gave a discreet cough. "If I may, Your Grace, estate records are easily misunderstood by those unfamiliar with their structure." Beatrice turned slightly. "Then perhaps their structure should make honesty easier to find." Venn's mouth tightened before he bowed. "A graceful sentiment, Miss Harrow." "No," Adrian said. "A useful one." The room went still again, but this time the silence did not belong to Lady Cecily. Adrian leaned back slightly. "I will review the Northfell petition myself." Venn lowered his eyes. "Of course, Your Grace." Lady Cecily smiled. "Miss Harrow has had an eventful first day. One hopes she does not exhaust all her cleverness before the week is out." Beatrice turned to her. "I ration most things carefully, my lady." The Dowager covered her smile with her napkin. Adrian looked down at his glass, but not before Beatrice saw the briefest fracture in his composure. It was not a smile, not quite. It was interest, and interest was far more dangerous than politeness. After luncheon, the guests moved toward the drawing room, but Beatrice remained a moment behind to collect the Dowager's spectacles from beside her plate. Lady Cecily paused at the doorway. "You performed well, Miss Harrow. I did not know I was performing. All poor women perform. Some simply choose sincerity as their costume." Beatrice folded the spectacles into their case. "And some rich women choose kindness as theirs." Lady Cecily's face did not change, but the air between them cooled. "Do be careful. His Grace dislikes disorder. Then he must find Evershade very trying." Lady Cecily's eyes hardened. "You think yourself safe because Augusta is amused and Adrian is curious. You are not." Beatrice said nothing. Lady Cecily smiled again and left. Beatrice waited until the door closed before releasing the breath held in her chest. She turned to go and found the Duke standing near the sideboard, half screened by the high-backed chair at the head of the table. He had heard enough. Perhaps not all. Enough. In his hand lay her right glove, which she must have dropped when taking up the spectacles. The mended thumb faced upward. For one painful second, she felt more exposed by the worn fabric than she had by any insult at luncheon. He crossed the room and offered it to her. "You left this. Thank you, Your Grace." She reached for it, but he did not release it immediately. His gaze rested on the careful stitches. Not pity. That would have been easier to despise. This was something quieter and more unsettling. Recognition, perhaps, of labor meant to remain unseen. "You should have been seated from the beginning," he said. "That was not your arrangement. It is my house." The words were plain. They carried no raised voice, but they altered something. Beatrice took the glove. Then your house has many arrangements you may wish to examine. The boldness of it should have frightened her. Instead, the truth steadied her. Adrian held her gaze. Including you, Miss Harrow. Especially me, if your grace still expects me to vanish by next week. For the space of a breath, neither of them moved. Then the Duke inclined his head, a gesture more formal than apology, and less distant than dismissal. I shall adjust my expectations. Beatrice curtsied and left before her composure could reveal how deeply the words had struck. In the corridor, beyond the line of portraits and closed doors, the cracked brass key pressed against her palm inside her pocket. It no longer felt merely like a tool for passage. It felt like proof that Evershade had hidden doors, hidden rules, and hidden loyalties. Behind her, in the dining parlor, the Duke's voice sounded low and controlled as he summoned Pritchard. Tell me why Miss Harrow was placed behind my mother's chair. Beatrice did not stop walking, but she heard the answer begin with a silence. That silence followed her all the way to the east wing. By the time the house settled into its evening hush, Beatrice understood that Evershade Hall did not sleep so much as listen. Doors closed softly, not out of peace, but out of practice. Footsteps slowed near corners. Voices dropped before they reached the main corridor. Even the servants' bells seemed to tremble rather than ring, as if every request might become evidence against the person who answered it. Beatrice sat in her small east wing chamber with the Dowager Duchess's correspondence arranged on the writing table and the cracked brass key beside her candle. She had meant to copy 2 replies before retiring. Instead, she found herself staring at the place where the Duke had held her mended glove that afternoon, his grey eyes fixed upon the stitches, as though he had discovered a wound she had not intended to show. She disliked that memory, not because he had been unkind, but because he had not been. Cruelty could be answered. Attention required more caution. A faint sound moved beyond her door, not the ordinary creak of old boards, a scrape, then another. Beatrice lifted the candle, opened the door, and found Nell kneeling beside a small bundle tied in a shawl. The maid's cap was crooked, her eyes bright with tears she was fighting too hard to hide. At her feet lay 1 pair of worn shoes, a folded apron, and a little wooden box no larger than a Bible. Nell, Beatrice said quietly. Where are you going? Nell jerked upright and nearly knocked the bundle apart. Nowhere, miss. Then you pack very thoroughly for remaining still. The girl pressed both hands to her apron. Please don't call Mr. Pritchard. I have not called anyone. Beatrice stepped into the corridor and closed her chamber door behind her. Tell me the truth. Nell looked toward the dark turn of the passage, then back at Beatrice. Miss Lark, said Lady Cecily, hasn't forgotten the shawl. She said sometimes a girl is wise to leave before the household learns to dislike her. Did Miss Lark threaten you? Not in words a person could repeat. The answer was too familiar. Beatrice set the candle upon a narrow table beneath a portrait of some long-dead Vale Brook lady with pearls at her throat and judgment in her painted eyes. And if you leave tonight, what character will you carry? Nell's mouth folded inward. None, likely. Then you will be accused by your own departure. If I stay, they'll find something else. The words came in a rush now, as if silence had broken under its own weight. They always do. Miss Dane asked about the maid's wages, and 2 days later there was a silver thimble in her workbox, Mrs. Harrow said a receipt had been copied wrong, and then a vinaigrette west missing. Miss Bell cried in her Grace's room, saying she had written to his Grace, but the letter never went. She was gone before breakfast. They don't shout here, miss. They just make you look dishonest until you go. Beatrice felt the corridor chill around her. Names were becoming pattern. Pattern was more dangerous than cruelty, because pattern meant design. Who is they? Nell shook her head hard. I don't know. Not truly. You know enough to be afraid. That's not the same as proof. Beatrice looked at the girl's bundle. No, but it is enough to make flight seem sensible. That is how traps often work. Nell swallowed. What should I do? The question was too large to answer with comfort. Beatrice had no estate, No influence, no authority beyond the fragile dignity she carried like a lamp in wind. Yet Nell was looking at her as if a poor companion might still be a kind of shelter. That trust cost something. It always did. Unpack, Beatrice said. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow you will keep near Mrs. Vale when possible. You will not be alone with Miss Lark. If anyone speaks to you of leaving, you will say you serve her grace and await orders from proper authority. Nell stared. They'll laugh. Then let them waste breath. A bell rang before Nell could answer. Not the soft single call Beatrice had heard earlier, but a broken, urgent sound. Once, twice. Then a pause. Then 3 quick rings that seemed to catch against the walls. Nell went pale. Her grace. Beatrice already had the cracked key in her hand. She ran neither wildly nor slowly. Panic wasted time. She moved through the narrow side door, turned the key, and entered the passage Pritchard had shown her. The air inside was cold enough to sting her throat. Candlelight swung over stone, over faded wallpaper, over a line of old hooks where cloaks had once hung. Behind her, Nell gathered her skirts and followed. Fetch Mrs. Vale and hot water, Beatrice said. And Pritchard if you pass him. Quietly, Nell vanished the other way. Beatrice reached the Dowager's sitting room through the inner panel and found Augusta Valebrook half slumped in her chair, one hand pressed against her chest, her spectacles fallen near her feet. The fire had burned low. A letter lay open across her lap. Your Grace, Beatrice set the candle down and knelt beside her, touching not with fear but with care. The Dowager's skin was cool, her breath shallow but present. Do not fuss, Augusta whispered. I have no talent for dying tidily. Then you must postpone it until the room is better arranged. The Dowager's mouth moved faintly. Impertinent girl. Yes, Your Grace. Breathe slowly. Beatrice loosened the shawl at the Dowager's throat, moved the footstool nearer, and reached for the cordial bottle on the side table. The label was turned outward, but the stopper had been set too tightly. She used the edge of her sleeve for grip, opened it, and measured the drops as the physician's note on the tray instructed. By the time Mrs. Vale arrived with Nell and hot water, Beatrice had the Dowager's hand warmed between her own, and the bell cord moved within reach. Pritchard entered moments later, his face controlled but his eyes grave. Her Grace, faintness, Beatrice said. She has taken the drops. Send for the Duke, but not with alarm. And the fire wants building. Augusta's eyes opened a little more. She gives orders well for a woman not expected to last a week. Pritchard looked at Beatrice, then bowed. Very well, Your Grace. The Duke arrived with Lady Cecily only a few minutes behind him, as if concern and opportunity had travelled the same corridor. Adrian's coat was unbuttoned, his expression stripped of its usual distance. He went at once to his mother's chair. Mother, do not loom, Adrian. You block the fire. Relief crossed his face so quickly that Beatrice might have missed it, had she not been kneeling beside the hearth. Lady Cecily swept in with a pale wrapper over her evening gown, and Miss Lark behind her. Her gaze moved from the Dowager to Beatrice, then to the small panel door standing ajar behind the tapestry. How extraordinary, she said softly. Miss Harrow came through the private passage. Beatrice rose. Her Grace rang. The passage was the fastest route. Of course. I only wonder how proper it is for a young woman newly arrived to possess such access to family rooms at night. The room cooled more swiftly than the fire could mend. Mrs. Vale looked down. Nell froze with the coal scuttle in her hands. Adrian turned from his mother. The key was given by my household. Was it? Lady Cecily's brows lifted with delicate concern. How trusting. One must hope no misunderstanding follows. Houses have reputations, as women do. Beatrice understood the shape of the attack at once. Impropriety did not need evidence. It needed suggestion, timing, and witnesses willing to pretend concern was virtue. If Your Grace wishes the key returned, I will return it, she said, looking at the Duke rather than at Cecily. But I will not apologize for reaching the Dowager quickly. Adrian held her gaze. Whatever conclusion he reached it before speaking. You will keep the key. Lady Cecily's smile did not break, but the skin around it tightened. Adrian, surely until matters are settled. They are settled. His tone made the sentence a door closing. He looked to Pritchard. No one is to question Miss Harrow's use of that passage while she attends my mother. Yes, Your Grace. Adrian's eyes moved briefly to Beatrice's hands. Only then did she notice they were shaking. She folded them at once, but not quickly enough. Mrs. Vale, he said, send tea to Miss Harrow's chamber when her Grace is settled, and a warming brick. The passage is cold. Lady Cecily glanced at him. Beatrice did not. She kept her face still because warmth, when offered publicly by a man who had dismissed her, could become another kind of danger if she let it show. Thank you, Your Grace. You served my mother well. The words were plain, and because they were plain, they touched deeper than praise. The Dowager closed her eyes. At last, a sentence in this room worth hearing. No one answered that. The crisis ebbed into practical tasks. The fire was restored. The Dowager's breathing steadied. Lady Cecily withdrew with Miss Lark, after offering concern so polished that it left no mark. Adrian remained until his mother ordered him out with a weak wave of her hand. Beatrice stayed last to fold the shawl, replace the cordial, and gather the fallen spectacles. The letter on the Dowager's lap had slipped to the carpet. When Beatrice bent to retrieve it, a smaller scrap slid from beneath the chair and landed near the hearth. It was folded once. No seal, no name. Her first thought was that it belonged to the Dowager. Her second was that the handwriting was too hard, too hurried, and meant not to be kept. She opened it just enough to read by the low fire. Once she has the key, remove her. Beatrice stood very still. The crackle of coal, the faint breathing of the Dowager, the whisper of rain against the window, all seemed to withdraw until only those 7 words remained. The house had not merely expected her to leave. Someone had made plans for it. She folded the note again and slipped it beneath the cuff of her sleeve before the old woman opened her eyes. Miss Harrow, Augusta murmured. Yes, Your Grace, you saw something. Beatrice looked toward the hidden panel, then at the cracked brass key lying dark in her palm. Yes, will it send you away? The answer came quietly, but without hesitation. No, Your Grace. The Dowager's tired mouth curved. Good. Then the house has miscalculated. By the 3rd morning of Beatrice Harrow's employment, the house had learned to smile at her with its teeth hidden. Nothing improper occurred in a way that could be named. No voice rose. No door was shut in her face. Yet her breakfast tray arrived cold after the Dowager's had been served hot. A book she had marked for reading vanished from the sitting room and returned to the wrong shelf with a pressed flower between pages she had never opened. The footman who had answered her first note to Mrs. Vale now avoided her eyes. Small things, elegant things. The sort of things a woman sounded foolish for noticing unless she waited until they had become a noose. Beatrice did not wait. She kept the folded warning note inside the lining of her writing case. The cracked brass key on a ribbon beneath her bodice, and a list of every irregularity, written in a neat hand no one would mistake for hysteria. Shortly before noon, she discovered that the letter she had written to her aunt in Bath had not gone out with the morning post. There was a delay, miss, the footman said, shifting from one polished shoe to the other outside the East Wing sitting room. Mr. Venn took the post bag to the estate office. Said there were papers needing to be sorted with it. Beatrice looked up from the Dowager's correspondence. Estate papers are commonly sorted with private letters. The footman's face reddened. I wouldn't know, miss. No, I suppose you would not. The Dowager, who had seemed asleep beneath her black shawl, opened one eye. Who took the bag? Mr. Venn, Your Grace, Beatrice said. Augusta's mouth tightened. Stewards who meddle with post often call it efficiency. And what is it called by those who receive no letters? Preparation. Beatrice folded the letter she had been copying. For what? For loneliness, usually. The answer was too quiet to be merely clever. Beatrice looked at the old woman, but the Dowager had closed her eyes again. That afternoon, as Beatrice crossed the small gallery above the entrance hall, she saw Mr. Silas Venn below, with the postbag tucked under one arm and a ledger beneath the other. Lady Cecily stood near the open door of the morning room. gloved in pale blue, her profile serene as she spoke to him. Their words did not carry. Their silence after they noticed Beatrice did. Ven bowed with the mild expression of a man who found all women inconvenient once they began observing him. Lady Cecily smiled upward. "Miss Harrow, how industrious you are. One hopes Her Grace is not exhausting you." "Her Grace gives me useful work, my lady. How fortunate. Useful women are so rarely bored." Beatrice curtsied and continued on. She did not look back. She did not need to. She felt Cecily's gaze follow her like a cool hand placed between the shoulders. On the fourth afternoon, Beatrice returned from reading to the Dowager and found the latch of her chamber door resting half a finger's width from where she had left it. It was a small error. Small errors were often the only kind careless people made when they believed poverty had trained a woman not to question being searched. Beatrice stood outside the door long enough for her heartbeat to steady. Then she entered, closed the door, and set her candle upon the table, though daylight still filled the room. Her trunk sat beneath the window. The strap had been rethreaded correctly, but not by the same hands that had tied it. Her brown gown lay folded with its sleeve facing left instead of right. Her purse was beneath the spare chemise where she had placed it, but the coins inside had been turned, not taken, counted, judged. She opened the writing case. The warning note remained hidden in the lining. The torn edge of the old wage receipt she had found, tucked in the Dowager's correspondence, still lay beneath the blotter. But near the corner where her sealing wafers had been arranged, a speck of blue wax clung to the wood. Beatrice bent closer. It was not hers. She owned no blue wax. She took a pin from her cuff, lifted the tiny flake onto a scrap of paper, and folded it into the same hidden lining as the note. Then she searched her own room, with the patience of a woman who understood that outrage wasted evidence. Beneath the drawer pull, she found a single thread of pale blue silk, caught where no thread from her own gowns could have come loose. She folded that away too. Only after everything had been listed did she sit on the bed. Her hands were cold. That was all. Not shaking. Not yet. A knock came at the door, and Nell's frightened whisper followed. "Miss Harrow." "Are you within?" Beatrice opened it. Nell stood with fresh water, eyes darting toward the corridor. "Miss Lark was here earlier," the maid breathed. "She said she was checking whether your fire had been laid properly." "My fire was not lit." "No, miss." Beatrice looked down the corridor, empty except for the stretch of carpet and the closed doors of a house too practiced in pretending. "Thank you, Nell. Did she take anything?" "No." "Then why come?" Beatrice thought of the counted coins, the blue wax, the searched folds. Perhaps to learn where not to search next time. Nell's mouth trembled. "You should leave, miss. That is becoming a popular recommendation. I mean it kindly. I know." Beatrice touched the girl's sleeve once briefly. "That is why I will forgive you for it." By the fifth day, Lady Cecily had grown tired of private arrangements and returned to public ones. She brought 3 county ladies after luncheon, all feathers, perfume, and interest sharpened by boredom. Mrs. Ellison had the smooth face of a woman who stored scandal carefully. Lady March smiled as if kindness were a ribbon she wore for effect. Miss Penrose, younger and less practiced, stared at Beatrice with open curiosity before remembering to look away. "Augusta," Lady Cecily said, settling herself near the Dowager's chair, "I have brought relief from solitude. And of course, we must introduce everyone to Miss Harrow, our latest ever experiment in companionship." Beatrice stood beside the writing table with the North Bell petitions in hand. Latest experiment. The phrase was meant to sound whimsical. It carried the bodies of the women before her. Miss Elspeth Dane, Mrs. Carrow, Miss Bell. Women reduced to a series of failed trials in a house that called itself honest. The Dowager's eyes sharpened. Experiments are useful. They reveal what an environment cannot support. Lady March smiled uncertainly. "How very scientific." "Not at all," Augusta said. "I was speaking morally." Lady Cecily's fan opened with a soft snap. "Miss Harrow has been invaluable. She reads petitions now. Tenant sorrows are quite her province." "Because I am poor, my lady?" Beatrice asked. The fan stilled. Because you are earnest. Then poverty and earnestness have at least taught me to read carefully. Mrs. Ellison's brows rose. Lady Cecily gave a light laugh. Do enlighten us. The Dowager lifted one hand. Read the North Fell petition. Beatrice did. Her voice remained even as she spoke of Mrs. Pike, a tenant widow, whose husband had died after paying the lease through harvest, and whose south field Mr. Venn recommended reclaiming before Michaelmas due to arrears on a separate account. The room shifted while she read. Polite women enjoyed sorrow best when it came dressed as distance. Beatrice refused to let it remain distant. The practical remedy is simple, she said when she finished. Permit Mrs. Pike to gather the crop. Deduct a fair portion toward arrears. Require the next lease to be reviewed after harvest rather than before it. The estate loses less money by allowing a widow to pay than by turning her into a warning. Miss Penrose looked down. Mrs. Ellison murmured, That sounds almost sensible. Almost? The Dowager asked. Mrs. Ellison colored. Lady Cecily's smile thinned. How moving. One does wonder whether sentiment should govern land. A voice answered from the doorway. I asked for judgment, Cecily, not sentiment. Adrian stood there with Mr. Venn just behind him, the steward carrying another ledger as if ledgers were shields against conscience. The Duke's gaze passed over the county ladies, his mother Beatrice and the papers in her hand. Miss Harrow, continue. Mr. Venn stepped forward. Your Grace, the North Fell account includes details perhaps unsuitable for general company. Then summarize the details you think Miss Harrow has missed. Venn's pale lashes lowered. Only that estate discipline must be consistent. Beatrice turned to him. Discipline that destroys repayment is not consistency. It is vanity written in figures. Lady Cecily laughed softly. Miss Harrow has such confidence for a person in her first week. Adrian looked at Beatrice. Why did you stay? The question was so direct that the room lost its rustle. Beatrice knew he did not mean the sitting room. He meant the insult she had overheard. The shawl, the missing post, the pressure curling around every hour. He meant all of it, though he could not yet know all of it. She folded the petition once and held it steady. Because your Grace's opinion was not the measure of my endurance. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of rearrangement. The Duke's face changed very little, but something in his eyes did. Lady Cecily saw it, and this time she did not hide her displeasure quickly enough. How admirable, she said. We must celebrate such endurance properly. She rose, closing her fan. Adrian, I have decided the engagement dinner should be held the evening after tomorrow. Your mother is improved, the county is eager, and Miss Harrow has nearly completed her famous week. It would be unkind not to let her witness what permanence looks like. The words were wrapped in laughter, but Beatrice heard the threat beneath them. So did Nell, who stood near the tray with white fingers. So perhaps did the Duke, for his gaze moved from Cecily to Venn, who waited by the estate office door, with the ledger held tight against his chest, and the post-bag once again in his hand. The evening after tomorrow, Adrian said slowly. Yes, Lady Cecily replied, unless you object. Beatrice looked down at the petition to hide what her face might reveal. The house had failed to frighten her away in 5 days. Now it was arranging a room full of witnesses to try something sharper. The engagement dinner was announced as a celebration, but by 6 o'clock that evening, Beatrice Harrow understood that it had been arranged as a test with candles. Every corridor of Evershade Hall had been polished into obedience. The footman moved in powdered stillness. The long dining room glowed with silver, crystal, and white roses, sent from Fairbourne House, though the Dowager Duchess had already declared them too pale to be honest. Beatrice stood in Augusta Vale-Brooke's sitting room with a folded shawl over one arm, and the Dowager's medicine tray prepared, listening to the distant arrival of carriage wheels below. The county had come to admire permanence, as Lady Cecily had promised. Beatrice had been meant to remain upstairs, useful, invisible, and safely absent from the room where rank would crown itself. Lady Cecily's note had been delivered that afternoon in a graceful hand. Miss Harrow will of course attend her Grace above stairs. The evening will be fatiguing for unnecessary persons. The Dowager had read it once, handed it to the fire, and said, "Wear your brown silk." Beatrice had looked down at her plain day gown. "Your Grace, I own no brown silk." "Then wear the gown that offends them least by refusing to apologize. That may be all of them." "Excellent. We shall be well represented." Now Augusta sat upright in her chair, frail in body and merciless in eye, while Nell fastened the black lace at her throat. "You will attend me at dinner," the Dowager said. "If anyone asks why, you may say I have become dependent upon good sense and find the household supply unreliable." Beatrice folded her hands. "Lady Cecily will object." Lady Cecily objects to gravity when it pulls attention from her. A knock sounded. Pritchard entered with his usual grave composure, though his gaze moved once to Beatrice's face in a manner almost apologetic. "His Grace asks whether her Grace is prepared to descend. Tell my son I have been prepared for longer than he has been observant." Pritchard bowed and withdrew. In the corridor outside, Beatrice paused to adjust the Dowager's shawl, and found Adrian standing near the turn of the stair. He was dressed in black evening coat and white waistcoat, every line severe enough to belong to a portrait. Yet his eyes moved at once to the untouched tea tray behind Beatrice. "You have not eaten," he said. The observation startled her more than a compliment would have done. "I have been occupied, Your Grace." That was not a denial. The Dowager, already several feet ahead with Nell, made no sign of listening, which meant she was listening completely. Adrian looked toward Pritchard, who had returned behind him. "See that Miss Harrow has tea before the evening grows worse." Beatrice kept her voice even. "That is unnecessary. Many necessary things begin, as orders women are too tired to give for themselves." It was not tender in any ordinary sense. It was too controlled for that. Yet the words placed a small warmth beneath her ribs, unwelcome because it arrived at the edge of danger. "Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me for noticing late." Before she could answer, Lady Cecily's voice rose from below, bright and perfect. "Adrian, everyone is waiting." He turned away, and Beatrice followed with the Dowager into the lighted descent. Lady Cecily stood at the foot of the stairs wearing ivory silk and the Veilbrook sapphire brooch upon her breast. The jewel was old, deep blue, and unmistakable. It belonged to the family collection, not to a bride before marriage. A slight murmur passed among those gathered in the hall, then hid itself beneath smiles. Lady Cecily touched the brooch, as if modestly embarrassed by admiration. "Augusta, you look wonderfully strong." The Dowager's eyes fixed upon the sapphire. "And you look wonderfully confident." Adrian wished me to feel welcome. Adrian, just behind Beatrice, said nothing. His silence was not agreement. It was calculation, and Lady Cecily's fingers tightened for a heartbeat upon the jewel before she released it. At dinner, Beatrice was seated beside the Dowager by Adrian's direct order, though Lady Cecily's seating plan had left her name absent again. The Marquess of Fairbourne raised one brow at the rearrangement. The Marchioness looked Beatrice over, as if one could discover lineage by inspecting sleeve cuffs. Mr. Venn occupied a place near the lower end of the table by special invitation. An estate steward, elevated just enough to be useful, and seated far enough to remain deniable. His ledger was not present, but Beatrice could feel the absence of it like a locked door. Lady Cecily lifted her glass. How delightful to have so many friends gathered to mark the happiness of two houses. Her gaze passed over Beatrice. And how generous of dear Augusta to bring every comfort with her, even those comforts that are nearly at the end of their trial period. A few guests laughed softly. Beatrice's hands remained still in her lap. The cracked brass key rested beneath her glove, tied to a ribbon around her wrist for want of any safer place. The Dowager's voice cut through the laughter. "Miss Harrow has lasted longer than several reputations at this table would under honest examination." A spoon struck porcelain. Lady Cecily smiled. "Augusta, you are wicked tonight." "No, merely awake." The first course was served. Conversation resumed with forced elegance, but the current had shifted. Adrian spoke little. Yet whenever Lady Cecily tried to draw him into some public tenderness, he answered with courtesy too cool to satisfy her. Beatrice did not mistake that for rescue. A man could be uncomfortable with arrogance and still fail the person harmed by it. Halfway through the meal, the Marquess turned to Mr. Venn. I am told Northfell has become a subject of sentimental debate. Venn inclined his head. Only a minor misunderstanding, my lord. Miss Harrow, with admirable feeling, mistook a preliminary estate recommendation for hardship. Ah, the Marquess said. A companion's pity applied to land management. Beatrice lifted her eyes. A steward's figures applied to a widow's hunger can also be called pity, my lord, if the figures are wrong. The Marquess stared. Lady Cecily gave a light, warning laugh. Miss Harrow does enjoy the thrill of being unexpected. Evidence is often unexpected when no one has invited it, Beatrice said. Then she did what she had not planned to do until the room made silence impossible. She drew the cracked brass key from beneath her glove and placed it beside her plate. The small sound of metal against china moved farther than a shout. This key opened more than a passage. It opened a writing room cabinet that had not been cleared properly. The Dowager's face did not change, but her fingers stilled. Adrian looked directly at the key. What did you find? Beatrice took a folded paper from the narrow pocket hidden in her skirt. A torn wage receipt bearing the name Miss Elspeth Dane. It is marked paid, though Nell told me Miss Dane left in distress after asking about wages. The handwriting on the receipt does not match the housekeeper's account book. It does, however, match a notation I saw on the Northfell papers. Mr. Venn's face lost its mildness so quickly that only a careful observer would have noticed. Adrian noticed. May I see it? Beatrice passed the paper to him. Lady Cecily laughed softly. Adrian, surely we are not turning our engagement dinner into an audit because a paid companion has discovered a scrap. A paid companion discovered what my steward failed to explain, Adrian said. Venn rose halfway. Your Grace, if I may clarify, old household receipts are frequently misfiled. Women in temporary positions sometimes misunderstand arrangements made for their benefit. Miss Dane was accused, Beatrice said. Mrs. Carrow was accused. Miss Bell vanished before breakfast. Nell was nearly accused over a shawl that had no coal dust upon it. How many misunderstandings are required before they become a method? The room went rigid. The Marchioness of Fairbourne set down her glass. This is an intolerable display. The Marquess looked at Beatrice with open contempt. Young woman, you forget yourself. Adrian's voice arrived cold and exact. No, my lord. She remembers what others hoped forgotten. The Marquess turned red. Lady Cecily's smile sharpened. How very gallant, Adrian. One must be careful. Some women mistake attention for elevation. Beatrice felt the blow beneath the silk. She had no title to shield her, no fortune to make insult expensive. But she had the receipt, the note, the blue wax flake hidden away, and the sudden knowledge that at least one person in the room had not looked away. Adrian set the receipt beside his plate. Mr. Venn, you will bring all companion wage records and related household authorizations to my library tomorrow morning. Your Grace, tomorrow may not be convenient. Then let inconvenience begin. Early. The Dowager leaned back, satisfied. Around the room, servants stood very still, but Beatrice saw Nell near the sideboard lower her eyes as if hiding hope. That was worth more than triumph. The dinner limped onward after that, no longer a celebration but a battlefield, pretending to serve dessert. Lady Cecily recovered beautifully. She praised the pastry, laughed with Mrs. Ellison, and let the sapphire flash whenever she turned toward the lamps. Only when the ladies withdrew did she pass close enough to Beatrice to murmur, You have mistaken a key for a crown. Beatrice answered without looking at her. And you have mistaken a brooch for a duchy. Lady Cecily's perfume lingered after she moved away, sweet enough to choke. Later, while the gentlemen remained over port and the drawing-room filled with brittle conversation, the Dowager pressed 2 fingers to her temple. My drops, she whispered. Beatrice rose at once. I will fetch them. Take Nell. Let the girl breathe a moment, Your Grace. I know the way. She left by the side corridor, grateful for the cooler air. The east wing was dim, the lamps turned low. Her own chamber door stood closed. She stopped before it. Something was wrong. No sound, no visible movement. Only the smallest shift in the latch, as on the fourth day. She opened the door slowly. Her candle had been lit, though she had left it unlit. The trunk beneath the window had been pulled out 2 inches. The top drawer of her small chest stood open. For one suspended moment, Beatrice saw only folded linen. Then the blue caught the light. At the center of her drawer lay the Veilbrook sapphire brooch, bright as judgment and cold as a verdict already written. Beatrice did not touch the brooch. The impulse to recoil was strong, but fear had no manners and no usefulness. She stood in the open doorway of her chamber, one hand still upon the latch, and let her eyes learn the room before anyone else taught it a lie. The candle on her table had been lit recently, the flame too high and clear to have been forgotten for long. The drawer had been pulled open, just enough for the sapphire to show from the corridor if the door stood wide. Beneath the polished lip of the drawer, caught on a rough edge of wood, was a single pale blue silk thread. It matched neither her gowns nor the lining of her trunk. The brooch itself rested upon folded linen as carefully as a jewel in a shop window, not hidden, displayed. A thief would have buried it beneath petticoats, stuffed it into a shoe, carried it away at once. Whoever had placed it there had wanted discovery more than possession. Beatrice drew one slow breath and stepped backward into the corridor, keeping both hands visible. The cracked brass key pressed cold against her wrist beneath her glove. The warning note lay in the lining of her writing case. The blue wax flake and silk thread from the earlier search were hidden in the same place. She had not imagined the pattern. It had arrived at her door in sapphires. She turned toward the passage to find Pritchard, but footsteps sounded from the stair before she reached the corner. Voices followed, bright with alarm too perfectly timed to be real. "Miss Harrow," Lady Cecily called. "How curious. I thought you came this way." Beatrice stopped. Lady Cecily appeared at the end of the corridor with Miss Lark beside her, the Marchioness of Fairbourne behind them, and Mrs. Ellison peering past a footman as if propriety had brought witnesses rather than appetite. Lady Cecily's hand went to her throat, her bare throat. The sapphire was gone from her gown. "What are you doing outside your room?" she asked. Beatrice turned fully to face her, looking for Mr. Pritchard. "How strange." "I am looking for something as well." Lady Cecily's eyes moved toward the half-open chamber door. "My brooch has vanished." Miss Lark gave a small gasp, almost before the sentence ended. Beatrice felt the shape of the scene close around her. The corridor, the lit candle, the open drawer, the ladies gathered at just the right moment. A stage, and she had nearly been placed at its center before she understood the script. "Then your grace should be told," Beatrice said. "I agree." Lady Cecily moved past her with the air of a woman forced into sorrow by another's impropriety. "Miss Lark, do look." Since Miss Harrow was kind enough to leave the door open. Beatrice's voice cut through the movement. "No one should enter that room until His Grace or Mr. Pritchard arrives." Lady Cecily stopped. "Do you give orders now?" "I preserve evidence, my lady." "Evidence?" Mrs. Ellison whispered. The word travelled. Miss Lark had already taken 2 steps inside. Beatrice did not touch her. She simply said, "If you move the drawer, you will be the first person to disturb what is inside, after me seeing it from the doorway." Miss Lark froze. Lady Cecily's smile faltered, then returned with a tremor of injured innocence. "Inside?" The Marchioness stepped forward sharply. "What is inside?" No one needed an answer. Miss Lark turned her head as if compelled by terrible duty, looked into the drawer, and covered her mouth. "My lady," Lady Cecily entered then slow and pale, and gave the gasp every person in the corridor expected. "The sapphire." She turned toward Beatrice. "In your drawer," the words did not shout. They did not need to. Doors opened along the corridor. A maid appeared and vanished. Footsteps gathered. The accusation moved ahead of explanation with the speed of a rumor that had waited all evening for permission. Beatrice stood very straight. I did not place it there. The Marchioness's face hardened. Then how came it among your linen? That is the question. Lady Cecily's eyes filled with tears. I tried to be kind. I tried to make allowances. But this, after the scene at dinner, after your insinuations about my household influence. Your household influence is not the matter before us, isn't it? Lady Cecily's voice broke beautifully. You wished to shame me. Now my own jewel is found in your room. It is not your jewel, Beatrice said. It is Vale Brook. That struck harder than she intended. Cecily's color changed. How dare you? The corridor parted as Duke Adrian arrived, Pritchard at his shoulder, and the Marquess of Fairbourne close behind. Adrian's gaze went first to Beatrice, then to the open door, then to Lady Cecily's bare bodice. He took in the candle, the drawer, the angle of the room. His face did not change, but his eyes did. No one moves, he said. The command settled at once. Lady Cecily took a step toward him. Adrian, it is found in her drawer, I heard. What more is there to hear? The Marquess demanded. A great deal, apparently. Adrian crossed to the threshold, but did not enter. Beatrice saw him notice the lamp, the exposed brooch, the thread beneath the drawer pull. He saw it. He knew enough to doubt. Relief almost reached her before caution stopped it. Doubt was not defense. Miss Harrow, he said, did you enter the room? Only as far as the doorway. I saw the brooch and stepped back. I did not touch it. Why was your candle lit? I did not light it. Who had access to your chamber? Any servant with a master key. Miss Lark entered 2 days ago under pretense of checking the fire. My trunk had been searched then. Miss Lark cried out. That's false. Pritchard looked at her. Be careful, Miss Lark. Lady Cecily's tears vanished behind indignation. Adrian, you cannot permit a companion to accuse my maid in order to escape what is plainly before us. The Marquess stepped nearer. Moorcliffe, this is intolerable. Your mother's dependent has already disrupted dinner with wild hints. Now a family jewel lies in her drawer. If you do not act decisively, the county will act for you by morning. Adrian's jaw tightened. Beatrice watched him weigh the room, the ladies in the corridor. The servants listening where they thought themselves hidden. His intended bride, pale and trembling. His mother upstairs, fragile after the previous night. His name. His house. Her future balanced against his convenience. Your Grace, Beatrice said quietly, I ask only that the room be examined before anyone decides what it means. Examine? Lady Cecily laughed once, high and wounded. Must we examine whether jewels walk? No, Beatrice said. Only whether liars do. The Marchioness gasped. The Marquess's face darkened. Adrian turned to Beatrice, and in that instant she saw the conflict inside him. Not uncertainty about her guilt. Something worse. A man trying to preserve truth without letting truth ruin the order he had been trained to guard. Miss Harrow, he said, very low, I do not believe you stole the brooch. The corridor shifted. Lady Cecily stared at him. Beatrice's heart gave one foolish beat of hope. Then he continued. But I cannot have this argued through a hallway before guests and servants while the matter is unsettled. You will withdraw tonight, quietly. Pritchard will arrange respectable transport and lodging. I will have the room sealed and the facts examined. The hope died so cleanly that for a moment she felt nothing at all. Withdraw, she repeated, until the truth is established. And what will the truth find when I am gone, Your Grace? A drawer arranged for witnesses, a companion removed before she could speak, and a house relieved of embarrassment. His face tightened. I am trying to prevent your public ruin. No. You are trying to prevent public discomfort. The words reached him. She saw that they did. He did not deny them quickly enough. Lady Cecily's tears returned. Adrian, she is insulting you under your own roof. Be silent, Cecily. The command shocked the corridor, but it came too late to save what mattered. Beatrice looked at him with a steadiness that cost more than anger. If you believe I did not steal it, then say so here. He did not speak. That silence answered. The Marquess seized it. There. His Grace is merciful. Take the mercy, Miss Harrow. Pritchard's face had gone pale with controlled distress. Adrian reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. You will not be left without means. Beatrice looked at it, then at him. He had defended her from insult at dinner. He had noticed her hunger. He had seen the thread. He had understood enough to know the accusation was staged. And still, he offered money where he owed courage. She did not touch the envelope. "I will not be paid to make your conscience quieter." His hand lowered. The words struck him harder than any public insult could have done. Lady Cecily watched with a satisfaction she did not fully hide. Beatrice entered her chamber, only after Pritchard stood at the door as witness. She took her writing case, her reticule, the folded warning note, the hidden wax flake, the earlier blue thread, and the torn wage receipt. She left the brooch where it lay. She would not carry another person's trap 1 inch farther. As she emerged, the corridor had grown crowded with silence. Then the Dowager, Duchess's voice, came from the far end. "Move aside." Augusta Valebrook stood wrapped in black, one hand on Nell's arm, her frailty burning with fury. "Mother," Adrian said, "you should not be here. Clearly I should have been everywhere." She looked at Beatrice, not at the brooch, not at Cecily, not at the room arranged to condemn. "You have the key." Beatrice's throat tightened. "Yes, Your Grace, keep it." Adrian turned sharply. "Mother, do not mother me now. I have heard enough of men choosing quiet and calling it protection." The words landed like judgment. Lady Cecily's face hardened. The Dowager held Beatrice's gaze. "Take the key, Miss Harrow. Some doors must be opened from the outside." Beatrice curtsied. It was not graceful. It was too full of everything she refused to let spill. "Your Grace." She walked past Lady Cecily without looking at her, past the Marchioness's cold satisfaction, past Mr. Venn, who had appeared near the stair with the stillness of a man watching accounts balance in his favor. At the foot of the stairs, Adrian stepped toward her. "Miss Harrow." She stopped, but did not turn fully. "When you find the truth, Your Grace, ask yourself why it required me to be gone before you could bear to see it." Then she descended. Pritchard ordered the carriage with a voice that did not tremble. Nell cried silently near the servants' door. Beatrice left Evershade Hall beneath a sky emptied of stars, the cracked brass key in her reticule, and the house's secrets folded against her heart. She had been sent away, as the others had been. But this time the house had failed to keep all its evidence inside. By dawn, the road to York had taught Beatrice Harrow a colder lesson than Evershade Hall. A woman could be sent away in a carriage and still feel pursued by every window she passed. The cracked brass key lay in her reticule beside the torn wage receipt, the folded warning note, the blue wax flake, and the 2 pale silk threads wrapped in paper. She had not slept. Each time wheels struck a rut, she saw again the sapphire brooch lying in her drawer with theatrical brilliance, saw Adrian Valebrook's face, as he said he did not believe her guilty, then asked her to vanish. As if belief without courage were a kindness. Pain tried to rise each time she remembered it. She gave it no chair. There would be time to feel later, if truth left her any room for weakness. The carriage set her down before a respectable lodging house, near a narrow street, where shop shutters were only beginning to open. Its sign was freshly painted, its steps scrubbed, its windows curtained in plain white. Mrs. Weatherby, the widow who kept the house, read Beatrice's letter of reference from her aunt in Bath, with careful eyes, and accepted payment for 2 nights in advance. "No callers above the parlor, no gentlemen received without my knowledge, and no gossip carried from my table," the widow said. "Those are my rules." "They are reassuring ones," Beatrice replied. "Rules usually are when honest people keep them, Mrs." Weatherby looked at her travel-stained gown. The fine manners poverty had not quite managed to wear away, and the reticule Beatrice held too closely. "You've come from trouble. I hope to return with its name." That answer should have earned suspicion. Instead, it earned a room at the back, a basin of hot water, and bread with tea. Beatrice ate because a woman who meant to fight a lie could not do it faint with pride. By noon, the widow knocked once and entered without fuss. A man asked at the door whether a brown-haired gentlewoman from Evershade had taken a room here. Beatrice set down her pen. What man? Not a gentleman, not quite a servant. He had the look of one used to standing behind better coats. Mr. Venn's sort of man, perhaps, or someone sent by Miss Lark. What did you tell him? That brown hair is common. Evershade is far, and I don't discuss my lodgers with strangers. Beatrice rose and went to the window. The street below held a baker's boy, a woman with a covered basket, 2 clerks and no obvious watcher. That did not comfort her. The best threats learned to look ordinary. Thank you, Mrs. Weatherby. If you're in honest trouble, keep to daylight. I intend to. Daylight doesn't stop wickedness, but it makes it work harder. When the widow left, Beatrice opened her small jewel case. There was little inside. A plain pin, a narrow chain, her mother's mourning brooch, black enamel, set around a lock of brown hair under glass. It had been the last pretty thing left to her that was not useful. She held it in her palm until memory threatened to soften her resolve, then closed the box and took it to a pawnbroker 2 streets away, accompanied by Mrs. Weatherby's niece for propriety. The sum was modest. It bought paper, ink, another night's lodging, and the dignity of not begging the Duke she had refused to forgive. By mid-afternoon, Beatrice stood before a narrow door in a quieter part of the city, where Miss Elspeth Dane was said to take copying work and fine mending from ladies who preferred cheap labor to visible gratitude. It took 3 knocks before anyone answered. The woman who opened the door was thin, dark-haired, and perhaps 30, though weariness had written older years around her mouth. Her dress was clean and carefully brushed. Her eyes went at once to Beatrice's gloves, her reticule, her face. I buy nothing at the door, Miss Dane. The woman's hand tightened on the latch. No, I am Beatrice Harrow. I came from Evershade Hall. The door began to close. Beatrice put no hand against it. Force would have proved she had learned nothing. They accused me too, she said. The door stopped with only a strip of Miss Dane's face visible. Of what? The Veilbrook sapphire brooch. Elspeth Dane stared at her. Then she opened the door wider, not in welcome, but in shock that had not yet remembered fear. You had better come in before the stairs learn too much. Her room was small, with a work table near the window, and mending stacked in tidy piles. No object was decorative except a chipped cup, holding 3 dried sprigs of lavender. Beatrice remained standing until Elspeth motioned to the chair. How long were you there? Miss Dane asked. 6 days. A bitter softness crossed the woman's face. Then you were efficient. I lasted 12. Beatrice placed the torn wage receipt on the table. Elspeth's hand went to her throat. Where did you find that? In a cabinet reached through the side passage. You have the key? Yes. Miss Dane stepped back, as if the word itself had opened a wound. This is where they ended my name, she said. Not to Beatrice, but to the room, to the memory, to the version of herself that had once left Evershade before breakfast. Not in this city. Not in any newspaper. In that house, with lowered voices and pitying eyes. A thimble in my workbox, a steward explaining mercy, Lady Cecily, saying she was disappointed because she had believed me. Respectable. You asked about wages? 2 maids had not been paid full quarter. I saw the adjustment in a ledger Mr. Venn left open. I thought it error. Elspeth laughed once without humor. Error is what powerful people call theft when they are still hoping no one can prove intention. Beatrice unfolded the warning note, the blue wax flake, and the silk threads. Elspeth bent over them. The color left her face. That wax, you Lady Cecily, used blue wax for private notes. Not ordinary blue, fairborn blue, she called it, because even sealing wax must have pedigree. I saw it on her glove the night before I was accused. She had been near the old writing room. Mr. Venn came out after her, with a ledger under his coat. Beatrice's pulse steadied into purpose. Would you write that down? Elspeth looked at the door. You think paper protects women like us? No, but silence has not. That reached her. Elspeth sat slowly. If I sign, they may say I am bitter. They already have. They may say I seek revenge. Then let them explain why revenge has dates, receipts, wax, room changes, and matching accusations. Elspeth looked at her for a long moment. You are angry. Yes. You do not sound it. I cannot afford to sound anything they can dismiss. The older woman's eyes filled, though no tear fell. Neither could I. It did not save me. Beatrice softened then, but only in voice. You do not owe me courage, Miss Dane. You owe nothing to Evershade. If you choose not to sign, I will still use what I have. Elspeth took up the pen. That is why I will sign. I am tired of surviving a lie alone. By evening, Beatrice returned to Mrs. Weatherby's house with Elspeth's signed statement folded inside her reticule. She wrote to Pritchard by a careful hand, not to Adrian. She asked for the dates of dismissals, the room assignments for Miss Dane, Mrs. Harrow, and Miss Bell, any record of ledger room entry on those nights, and whether Mr. Venn had interfered with post or household keys. She sealed the letter with plain brown wax and sent it by a trusted errand boy recommended by Mrs. Weatherby. The wait lasted through the night and most of the next day. Beatrice spent it copying Elspeth's statement twice, sorting evidence and watching the street without appearing to watch it. Once she saw a man in a dark coat pause near the corner and look up too long. Mrs. Weatherby shut the parlor curtains without being asked. Near dusk, the reply arrived. Pritchard's hand was formal, but the message beneath it shook the room, more than emotion would have done. Miss Dane's room had been changed to the east corridor by Mr. Venn the day before the thimble appeared. Mrs. Harrow had been moved nearer the old writing room 2 nights before the vinaigrette accusation. Miss Bell's letter to His Grace had never entered the outgoing post. The ledger room had been opened late on each dismissal night. Mr. Venn had signed for the master keys twice. At the bottom, in a line less steady than the rest, Pritchard had written, Her Grace asks whether you still have the key. If you return, do not return alone if possible. The house is not yet closed. Beatrice read the final sentence twice. Then she went to Miss Dane's room, with Mrs. Weatherby's niece beside her, and placed the letter on the work table. Elspeth read it without sitting. When she finished, she looked at the small piles of mending, the chipped cup, the life she had built from the scraps left after Evershade had finished with her. They will call us liars together, she said. Then they will need twice the breath. Elspeth gave a small, startled laugh that broke before it became joy. Do you mean to face them? Beatrice touched the reticule where the cracked brass key rested against the evidence. She thought of Adrian's envelope, Lady Cecily's jeweled throat, Nell's white face, and the Dowager telling her some doors must be opened from the outside. I mean to return, she said. Not for the Duke, not for the house. For every woman they taught to leave quietly. By morning, the carriage was ordered for Evershade Hall, and this time, Beatrice Harrow would not arrive as a woman hoping to be allowed inside. She would arrive with a witness, a key, and the names the house had tried to bury. Evershade Hall felt most guilty in the morning. By candlelight, under the noise of guests and dinner and accusation, the house had hidden behind drama. At 8 o'clock, with the rain thinning against the windows and servants, moving in careful quiet, there was nowhere for the truth to conceal its shape. Adrian Valebrook stood alone in Miss Harrow's chamber, and understood that neatness could be more damning than disorder. The brooch had been removed to the strongbox under Pritchard's witness, but the room still held the arrangement of the trap. The drawer remained open at the same measured width. The candle on the writing table had burned low and then out, leaving a narrow streak of wax down one side. Her trunk had been drawn from beneath the window by 2 inches, no more. The bed was smooth, the washstand undisturbed, the air faintly scented with smoke from a candle she had not lit. A careless thief would have left haste. A frightened thief would have left confusion. This room had been left with intention. Adrian crossed to the chest and crouched before the drawer. Beneath the pull, where Beatrice had looked before anyone else entered, a pale blue silk thread clung to a splinter of wood. He did not touch it. He looked at it until anger became something colder and more useful. He had seen that thread last night. He had seen the high flame, the staged drawer, the exposed jewel. He had seen enough to doubt the accusation, and not enough, he had told himself, to condemn the trap. That distinction now seemed like cowardice wearing gloves. Pritchard waited at the threshold. Has anyone entered since the room was sealed? Adrian asked. No, Your Grace. Who had keys? Mrs. Vale, myself, Miss Lark, through Lady Cecily's request for linen inspection, and Miss Then by the master key register. Adrian turned. Then, he signed for a ring of keys 2 nights ago, stating he required access to the old writing room cabinet for estate papers. The old writing room. The passage. The key. Miss Harrow had carried more of the house's truth in 6 days than its master had noticed in years. Have the register brought to the library, Adrian said, and no one is to clean this chamber. Yes, Your Grace. No one is to search Miss Harrow's property further. Speak of her as guilty or repeat the charge in the servants' hall. Pritchard inclined his head. I shall see it done. Adrian rose, his gaze returning once to the empty drawer. The absence of Beatrice unsettled him more than the brooch had. She had occupied the house with no rank, no fortune, no protection except manners and courage, and still Evershade had seemed more honest while she stood within it. Now she was gone, and every polished surface looked accused. He found his mother in her sitting room, refusing breakfast with the strength of a woman who had little strength to spare. The tray sat untouched beside her chair. Nell stood near the window with red eyes and rigid hands, while Mrs. Vale folded and refolded the same napkin, as if household linen could be punished for household shame. The Dowager did not look at Adrian when he entered. If you have come to ask whether I slept, I shall disappoint you. If you have come to ask whether I am angry, I shall not insult us both by answering. Mother, do not soften your voice. It suggests you think tenderness may excuse stupidity. He accepted it because the word was not unfair. Miss Harrow has gone to York. I know. How? Because she is intelligent enough not to stay where a man believes her in private and abandons her in public. Mrs. Vale looked down. Nell made a small sound, then pressed her lips together. Adrian turned to the maid. Nell, tell me everything you know about the shawl, Miss Lark, and the women who left before Miss Harrow. Nell's face emptied of colour. Your Grace, I don't want trouble. Trouble has already been made, I want truth. She looked to the Dowager, who nodded once. Then Nell spoke. At first she answered in fragments. The shawl behind the coal screen. Miss Lark watching from the side passage. Miss Dane asking about maids' wages. Mrs. Carrow noticing a copied receipt. Miss Bell saying she had written to His Grace before the letter vanished. The accusations had all been small, almost delicate. A thimble, a vinaigrette, missing lace. A reputation did not need a large stone to sink if tied to enough little ones. Who told you to keep silent? Adrian asked. Nell twisted her apron. No one exactly. Miss Lark said girls, without character, shouldn't make themselves noticeable. Mr. Venn said proper households don't reward nervous tales. Adrian looked at Mrs. Vale. And you? The housekeeper's face tightened with shame. I thought it was Lady Cecily's way of testing the household before the marriage, Your Grace. I thought if I objected, she would say I resented her authority. She had none. No, Your Grace. The admission hung in the room. Adrian felt his mother's gaze on him and knew what it meant. Lady Cecily had possessed no authority except the authority his silence had lent her. From this moment, he said, no servant is to be dismissed, transferred, denied wages, or refused a character without my direct written approval. If any person in this house threatens you for speaking, you will go to Pritchard, Mrs. Vale, or Her Grace at once. Nell blinked hard. Yes, Your Grace. The Dowager finally looked at him. A late order is better than a tasteful regret. I know. Do you? Her voice cut lower. You mistook silence for order, Adrian. You mistook fear for loyalty. You mistook Miss Harrow's restraint for something that would spare you from acting. He had no defense that would not worsen the truth. I am going to the estate office. Then look where you have not wished to look, Mr. Venn was waiting there with ledgers arranged in a tidy stack, too prepared for a man who claimed nothing unusual had occurred. He rose at once. Your Grace. I anticipated you might wish to clarify last night's unfortunate incident. Did you? Naturally. A house of this standing cannot allow confusion to flourish. Adrian closed the door. Bring me the companion wage records for the past 18 months, the master key register, and every room assignment altered by your instruction. Ven's expression remained mild, but one hand moved to the ledger. At the top of the stack. Those are separate departments of household record. Then unite them. With respect, Your Grace, much of this may prove irrelevant to the matter of Lady Cecily's brooch. I will decide relevance, Ven bowed. Of course. He moved to the cabinet near the lower shelves and selected 2 volumes, avoiding the bottom drawer. Adrian watched him avoid it. Open that drawer, Ven paused. That contains older papers. Open it. The steward obeyed. Inside lay folded authorizations, small packets of receipts, and a narrow blue thread tie around several slips of paper. Adrian saw the color and felt the room draw tight. Before he could speak, the door opened without a knock. Lady Cecily entered in pale grey morning silk, her face arranged in wounded composure. Adrian, Papa believes we must bring the wedding announcement forward. Last night has left too much room for vulgar speculation. Ven stepped back too quickly. Cecily noticed, then ignored it. This is not the time, Adrian said. It is precisely the time. Delay will make people wonder whether you doubt me. I doubt many things this morning. Her eyes sharpened. Including your future wife, including the peace of my house. Lady Cecily gave a soft laugh. Peace requires decision. Miss Harrow has gone. Let her go. A dismissed companion with a grievance can do less harm if we do not feed her importance. You mistake importance for truth. And you mistake a clever woman's performance for innocence. Adrian came around the desk. He did not raise his voice. No wedding date will be announced until the matter is answered. For the first time, her beauty failed to conceal calculation. If you make me wait, Adrian, people will ask why. Then they may begin practicing honest questions. Cecily's mouth tightened. You will regret letting this become public. Scandal has already entered this house, he said. It was merely well dressed. She looked at him, then at the cabinet, then at Ven. How dramatic you sound. One would think Miss Harrow left poetry behind with her stolen jewels. Leave us. The command struck cleanly. Cecily curtsied, but her eyes were cold. As you wish. For now. When she had gone, Adrian turned back to Ven. The records. Ven produced them with slower hands. By afternoon, the pattern had begun to emerge. Miss Dane's room changed the day before the thimble appeared. Mrs. Harrow moved near the old writing room before the vinaigrette accusation. Miss Bell's letter never entered the post ledger. The ledger room opened late on each dismissal night. Ven's signature sat beside master key access twice. Each fact alone might have been excused. Together, they formed a road leading through every vanished woman. Pritchard entered, carrying a sealed letter and a copied note. From York, Your Grace. Miss Harrow wrote to me. Adrian took it. Not to him, to Pritchard. That was just, and it stung more because it was just. He read her questions, exact and unsentimental. Dates, assignments, ledger entries, post-interference. She had been accused, dismissed, and followed into exile. Yet she had done what he should have done before asking her to leave. What did you answer? He asked. The truth, Your Grace. And that if she returns, she should not return alone. Adrian folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his coat. Send a trusted groom toward York, quietly. If Miss Harrow remains there, he is to see that she is not followed. He is not to approach unless she requests assistance. She is not to feel watched by this house again. Yes, Your Grace. Adrian sat at the desk after Pritchard left and drew a sheet of paper toward him. Miss Harrow, I owe you. He stopped. Owe was too small. Regret was worse. Forgiveness would be an insult before repair. He tore the page in half and placed it in the fire. I asked the wrong woman to leave, he said to the empty room. In the corridor outside, Silk whispered and then stilled. Adrian turned his head, but the sound had already withdrawn. Lady Cecily had heard enough to understand that silence no longer belonged to her. By nightfall, invitations for the county gathering remained in place, but their purpose had changed. Everyone expected an engagement announcement. Cecily, Adrian knew, would prepare an accusation instead. And somewhere on the York Road, if courage had the same face he remembered, Beatrice Harrow was coming back with the part of the truth Evershade had failed to bury. The carriage from York reached Evershade Hall beneath a low afternoon sky, and for one suspended moment, Beatrice Harrow felt the old house recognize her before any person did. Its windows stared through the mist. Its doors waited with the stillness of a mouth that had once spoken against her, and now must decide whether to repeat the lie. Beside her, Miss Elspeth Dane sat rigid, with both gloved hands locked around the packet of statements and copied dates. She had said very little since they left York. Fear had not weakened her. It had made her precise. When the carriage stopped before the front steps, Elspeth looked at the great entrance and drew one breath that shook only at the end. "This is where they ended my name," she said. Beatrice turned to her. "Then we shall not let them keep it." Elspeth's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, she gave one small nod. Beatrice stepped down first without waiting for help, because some thresholds required a woman to choose the weight of her own feet. She turned and offered her hand. Elspeth took it. They ascended together. The front door opened before Pritchard could appear, and His Grace Adrian Vale Brooke, Duke of Moorcliffe, stood in the entrance himself. He wore dark mourning dress, but there was nothing casual in his stillness. The cold authority remained. It had not vanished in one night of regret, yet something in him had altered. He looked not like a man prepared to manage a scandal, but like one prepared to be judged by it. His eyes moved first to Beatrice's face, then to Elspeth's hand in hers, and his expression tightened with understanding that came too late to be graceful. "Miss Harrow," he said. "Miss Dane." Elspeth curtsied with visible effort. "Your Grace." Beatrice inclined her head. "Your Grace." He did not offer his hand. She noticed that. He had learned at least the beginning of restraint. "Thank you for returning," he said. "I did not return for thanks." "No." He accepted the correction without defense. "You returned because the truth should not have had to leave this house in order to be heard." The words were better than she expected, and less than repair required. "Words are not restoration, Your Grace." "I know." He held her gaze. The entrance hall behind him glowed with lamps, though daylight remained outside, and the portraits above seemed to lean inward with ancestral disapproval. Servants stood along the edges of the hall. Nell near the side table, Mrs. Vale behind her, 2 footmen by the stair, and Pritchard at a careful distance from the door. This was not private. Beatrice was glad. A private apology would have been easier for him, and therefore insufficient. Adrian spoke clearly enough for the hall to hear. "I was wrong. I did not believe you guilty, but I acted as if private belief could excuse public failure. I asked you to withdraw because I feared scandal more than I honored truth. That was not protection. It was cowardice made respectable by rank." Nell lowered her eyes quickly. Mrs. Vale's lips pressed together. Elspeth's fingers tightened around Beatrice's hand. Beatrice felt the apology strike the wounded place inside her, and refused to let pain turn into softness too soon. "I will enter under conditions," she said. "Name them. Miss Dane remains with me." "Yes, no servant who speaks truth tonight is to be dismissed, transferred, threatened, deprived of wages, or denied a character. I have already ordered it. I will state it again before witnesses. Accusations are not to be repeated as fact, because a titled person prefers them. Agreed. I remain only until truth is heard, not as your dependent. Not as a guest, hidden to soothe your conscience. Not as a woman grateful to be admitted where she was pushed out." He bowed his head once. Agreed. Only then did Beatrice step across the threshold with Elspeth beside her. The hall seemed to release a breath. Nell's eyes filled, but she did not move. Beatrice gave her one small look. Not comfort, not yet, but recognition. Nell straightened, as if that were enough to stand upon. From the west drawing room came the sound of silk, and a bright voice sharpened by alarm. "Adrian?" I heard wheels. Lady Cecily Fairborn appeared in pale lavender, the kind of gown that made innocence look expensive. Her mother, the Marchioness, followed at her shoulder. Lady Cecily stopped when she saw Beatrice and Elspeth. The pause before her smile was brief. Beatrice still saw it. "Miss Harrow," Cecily said. "How very bold, and Miss Dane too. We are receiving quite a collection of grievances. Elspeth's hand trembled, but she did not step back. Beatrice answered before fear could be made visible. Grievances become evidence when dated. Lady Cecily's eyes cooled. Adrian, surely you don't intend to allow a woman accused of theft to parade through your hall with a former servant dismissed for dishonesty. Miss Harrow enters under my protection and by my invitation, Adrian said. Miss Dane enters as a witness and as a guest of this house until the matter is concluded. The Marchioness's mouth tightened. Your Grace, my daughter should not be exposed to this insult before the county arrives. Your daughter arranged an accusation before a corridor of witnesses, Adrian replied. She will survive hearing questions before a room of them. Lady Cecily touched her throat, where the sapphire had been the night before. The gesture was too practiced to be accidental. I arranged nothing. My brooch was found in Miss Harrow's drawer. A brooch was placed in Miss Harrow's drawer. The hall went still. Pritchard's gaze remained fixed on the floor, but his shoulders changed. Lady Cecily's colour shifted beneath its powder. You cannot mean that. I mean that no accusation will be repeated in my house without proof. Your house, she said softly. I had thought it was soon to be ours. The words were meant for every servant present. They failed because Adrian did not soften. No date will be announced tonight. The Marchioness drew herself up. This is outrageous. No, came the Dowager Duchess's voice from the stairs. This is belated. Augusta Vale Brooke descended slowly with one hand on the rail, and Nell's anxious attention following her from below, though Nell did not presume to touch. The Dowager wore black, as always, but a silver brooch pinned at her throat made her look less ill than armed. She reached the last step and looked at Beatrice. You kept the key? Beatrice drew the cracked brass key from her reticule. The hall saw it. The house, in its silent way, seemed to see it too. Yes, Your Grace. Good. A house should be ashamed when the wrong people hold its doors. Lady Cecily gave a brittle laugh. How theatrical. The Dowager turned her pale eyes toward her. My dear, theatrical women usually know when the audience has begun to dislike the performance. Cecily's lips parted, then closed. Adrian looked to Pritchard. The morning room is prepared. Yes, Your Grace. Miss Harrow and Miss Dane will use it until the inquiry begins. Mrs. Vale will attend them. No one else enters without their permission or mine. Then he turned back to Beatrice, and the public command became a private question in its shape. Is that acceptable? It is. He stood aside to let her pass. Beatrice and Elspeth followed Pritchard through the hall, beneath the portraits, and past the closed drawing-room doors where whispers had already begun to breed. Adrian walked a few paces behind, far enough not to claim authority over her movements, near enough to make clear that any challenge must pass through him. The corridor to the morning room was familiar and altered. Beatrice had once walked it as a paid companion under suspicion. Now she carried evidence, but evidence did not make the floor softer. Near the window overlooking the east lawn, she stopped. Elspeth went ahead with Mrs. Vale, leaving Beatrice and Adrian briefly apart from the others, though not hidden. Miss Harrow, he said. I know you have no reason to trust me. That is correct. He accepted the sentence as if it had been expected and deserved. Then do not trust me. Judge what I do next. She turned to him. The old anger rose, not hot now, but clean. I intend to. You will have every record I can obtain. I do not want your regret dressed as belief. He went still, she continued, lower now. Do not believe me because you feel ashamed. Believe Miss Dane, believe Nell. Believe the dates, the wax, the room assignments, the ledger entries, the servants who were taught that truth would cost them bread. Believe the pattern even if it becomes inconvenient to your name. His face changed, not much. Enough, you are right. Yes, Beatrice said. I am. She had never spoken those words to him before. They settled between them without apology. From the hall came Lady Cecily's laugh, bright and strained, pitched to travel. The county would arrive soon expecting an engagement announcement. Instead, Evershade would open its locked drawers before them. Beatrice entered the morning room, placed the packet from York upon the table, and saw Elspeth sit at last without looking toward the door. Pritchard closed it gently, not to conceal them, but to give two women 1 hour before the house they had outlived was forced to listen. By 8 o'clock, the great drawing-room of Evershade Hall had filled with people who had dressed for celebration and arrived in time for judgment. The chandeliers burned above polished hair, pale shoulders, black coats, and smiles held too firmly in place. County neighbours gathered in clusters, speaking of roads, harvest, and the dampness of the season, with the eager restraint of those waiting for scandal to make politeness unnecessary. Everyone had expected the Duke of Moorcliffe to announce an earlier wedding date to Lady Cecily Fairborn. Instead, they found the Dowager Duchess, seated like a black-clad witness near the hearth. Miss Beatrice Harrow standing at her right, with a packet of papers upon the table, and Miss Elspeth Dane beside her, pale but upright, as if the house had called back a ghost and discovered it could testify. Beatrice felt every glance. Some were curious, some pitying, some hungry. Mrs. Ellison leaned toward Lady March and whispered behind her fan with more volume than secrecy. One hears the companion returned from York with another one. Lonely women do make alliances quickly when dignity fails. The Marchioness of Fairborn stood near the mantel, her diamonds sharp as frost. "It is a sad thing," she said, to no one and everyone. A little kindness from a gentleman, a sick lady's dependence, a key to rooms above her station. Such circumstances can unbalance a young woman who has known reduced prospects. Beatrice kept her hands folded. The insult was not new. That was its power. Poor gentlewomen were always suspected of wanting too much. A chair, a wage, a name, a gentleman's notice. The world could forgive a woman for hunger more easily than ambition, because hunger looked down and ambition looked back. Elspeth's breathing quickened. Beatrice did not look at her, but she lowered one hand until the backs of their gloves touched. Elspeth steadied. Across the room, Adrian Valebrook stood with Mr. Cresswell, the family solicitor, a compact man with iron-grey hair, and a face that seemed built for documents no one could flatter. Pritchard waited near the door. Mr. Venn stood by the bookcase with a ledger under one arm, his mild expression too carefully arranged. Lady Cecily Fairborn moved through the gathering in pale silk, accepting concern as if it were tribute. She wore no sapphire now. The absence of it drew more eyes than the jewel had. The Marquess of Fairborn approached Adrian with a glass untouched in his hand. "Moorcliffe, this has gone far enough." Adrian did not step away from the room. "Has it? You cannot intend to." Parade household confusion before county witnesses. The accusation was made before witnesses. That was unfortunate, but containable. Truth is often called unmanageable by people who prefer the lie. The Marquess blushed. "My daughter's name is tied to yours. The settlements are discussed. The county expects an announcement. You will damage 2 houses because a dismissed companion has returned with papers and resentment." Adrian's gaze moved once to Beatrice, then returned to the Marquess. "Choose your next description of Miss Harrow carefully." The quietness of the warning carried. Conversations near the fireplace thinned. Lady Cecily stepped forward before her father could answer, one gloved hand pressed to her breast with exquisite reluctance. "Adrian, I had hoped not to speak of this." The room, already waiting, leaned inward without moving. "But I cannot permit cruelty to wear the face of justice." Beatrice felt the first true chill of the evening. Cecily drew a folded letter from her reticule. The seal had been broken, but a smear of blue wax remained along the edge, bright even in lamplight. This was found among papers gathered from Miss Harrow's room after she left. "I did not wish to show it. Truly I didn't. But if she means to accuse me, then I must protect myself." Adrian held out his hand. "Give it to me." Cecily hesitated. "It concerns you. Then give it to me." Her lashes lowered. "No, let everyone hear what I have been spared saying." She unfolded the page. Her voice trembled in a practiced rhythm as she read. "His Grace has begun to notice me. If I can weaken Lady Cecily's place in the household, he may see that a poor companion can be more necessary than a proud fiancé. The key gives me access enough. I must be careful, but not afraid. If Lady Cecily falls, I may rise. A murmur moved through the room. It was soft, but it cut. Elspeth whispered, "No." Beatrice stood very still. The forged words did not merely accuse her. They understood what the room was willing to believe. Lady Cecily looked at her with wet eyes and a mouth too controlled for sorrow. "I'm sorry, Miss Harrow. I know loneliness can twist hope into something dangerous." Beatrice's voice was quiet when it came. "No, my lady. You know what accusation will be easiest to sell." The Marchioness gasped. "Shameless." Adrian crossed the room. He did not place himself in front of Beatrice. He stopped beside her, close enough that every guest could see where he stood, not so close that he seemed to claim her voice. "Mr. Cresswell," he said. "Examine the letter." Lady Cecily gave it up slowly. The solicitor adjusted his spectacles beneath the lamp. "Miss Harrow, is this your handwriting?" "No, sir." The Marquess gave a harsh laugh. "Naturally, she denies it." Beatrice looked at him. "If I had written a confession, my lord, I would not have given myself a middle initial I do not possess." Mr. Cresswell looked at the signature. "Beatrice A. Harrow. My name is Beatrice Harrow." Mrs. Ellison's fan lowered a fraction. Lady Cecily recovered quickly. "A woman writing in agitation may ornament her own name. A forger may ornament it by mistake," Beatrice said. She took the letter only when Mr. Cresswell offered it, then held it by the edge. "The wax is also wrong." Cecily smiled with wounded patience. "Many people use blue wax. Not this blue." Beatrice turned toward Pritchard. "When I wrote from York, what sealed my letter? Plain brown wax, miss. Have I used blue wax in this house? Not to my knowledge, miss. Has Lady Cecily?" The Marchioness stiffened. "Servants do not inventory a lady's desk," Pritchard bowed. "No, my lady, but they do carry writing boxes when requested." Adrian looked at him. "The desk." Pritchard crossed to the small writing desk placed near the west wall, where Lady Cecily had answered notes before dinner more than once. Cecily's face sharpened. "That is private." "It is in my drawing room," Adrian said, "and it may clear your name." That left her no graceful refusal. Pritchard opened the drawer with a key from his ring and removed a slim box. Inside lay sticks of blue sealing wax, a silver seal, and a blotting sheet marked with fresh blue smudges. Mr. Cresswell compared the seal to the crushed mark on the letter. "The pressure corresponds." He touched the wax with the blunt end of his penknife and looked up. "The wax on this letter is recent. It cannot have been sealed before Miss Harrow left, unless wax has learned to remain soft out of loyalty." A nervous laugh began somewhere and died at once. The room shifted. Doubt, once admitted, changed the furniture of every face. Lady Cecily's eyes glittered. "So now my writing desk is to be used against me, because a companion can point and speak dramatically." "Miss Harrow has pointed to facts," Adrian said. "You have pointed to feeling. You would shame me for her." The word "her" was almost bare. Adrian's face did not change. "I stand here because of what was done, not because of whom you envy." Envy. The word moved through the room more sharply than accusation. Lady Cecily went white, then smiled. "How noble, how very dangerous for a duke to be led by sympathy, Mr." Venn, near the bookcase, shifted one foot toward the door. Beatrice saw it. So did Pritchard, who moved with such quiet precision that he was standing before the exit before Venn reached it. Adrian turned. "Mr. Venn, stay." Venn's pale lashes lowered. "I merely thought to fetch the household records, Your Grace. The records are under your arm." Silence fell. Venn looked once at Lady Cecily. It was only a glance. It was enough. "Bring the ledger here," Adrian said. "Your Grace, estate accounts may be misunderstood in mixed company. Then we shall improve the company's education." Venn approached the table and placed the ledger before Mr. Cresswell. His fingers lingered on the cover until Adrian said, "Open it." Pages turned. The room listened to paper, as if paper had become a voice. Mr. Cresswell compared Pritchard's copied dates with entries in Venn's hand, then with Beatrice's torn receipt and Elspeth's statement. "Here," he said, "Miss Elspeth Dane." Wage marked paid, then redirected as household adjustment. "Here, Mrs. Carrow." Same pattern. "Here, Miss Jane Bell." Payment entered, then removed under authority notation. Adrian leaned over the page. Whose notation? Mr. Cresswell angled the ledger toward the light. Mr. Venn's hand, countersigned by initials. He paused. The pause was not theatrical. It was worse. It was exact. L.C. F. Lady Cecily laughed once. Those could be anyone's initials. Beatrice pointed to the page edge. And the blue seal? Mr. Cresswell touched the faint crushed mark near the entry. The same private seal from the writing desk. Fairborn blue wax. Elspeth drew a breath that sounded like a door opening after years of being swollen shut. Nell, near the far wall, pressed both hands to her apron. Lady Cecily stood motionless, her beauty held in place by will alone. Adrian remained beside Beatrice. Not before her, not behind her. Beside her. The drawing room had come to hear an engagement announced. Instead, beneath the lamps and county eyes, it watched the first clean proof that the woman accused of theft had carried the truth back in her hands. The silence after Mr. Cresswell named Lady Cecily's initials did not fall empty. It filled every corner of the drawing room with all the things no one could politely pretend not to understand. The ledger lay open beneath the lamp, its columns neat, its ink dry, its damage very much alive. Beatrice stood beside the table with Elspeth Dane on one side, and the Dowager Duchess seated behind her like a stern conscience in black. Across from them, Lady Cecily Fairborn remained motionless, her face pale but still beautiful, as if beauty were the last servant in the room, willing to obey her. Mr. Venn stared at the ledger with the expression of a man watching a locked door open from the wrong side. The Marquess of Fairborn drew breath to speak, but no words arrived quickly enough. Adrian Valebrook looked at Mr. Cresswell. Continue. The solicitor turned the page. The pattern is repeated. Miss Elspeth Dane's wages are entered as paid in full. The following line redirects a portion as a household adjustment. Mrs. Carrow's account follows the same arrangement. Miss Jane Bell's wages are marked settled, then reduced under authority notation. In each case, room assignment changes appear within 48 hours before the accusation that led to dismissal. He placed Pritchard's copied register beside the ledger. The master key was signed out by Mr. Venn on 2 of those nights. The ledger room was opened late on all 3. Venn found his voice at last. Your Grace, state administration contains complexities that cannot be judged by ladies and guests in a drawing room. Then be grateful a solicitor is present, Adrian said. Explain the complexity. Venn's lips tightened. Household adjustments are sometimes necessary when women in temporary positions leave without completing service. Elspeth stepped forward. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. I did not leave because my service was incomplete. I left because a silver thimble was found in my workbox after I asked why 2 maids had not received full quarter wages. Lady Cecily turned on her with delicate contempt. And now you return with bitterness, rehearsed and polished. No, Elspeth said. I return with dates. Bitterness needs no dates. A murmur moved through the room, quieter than before, less friendly to Cecily. Mr. Cresswell lifted another sheet. Miss Dane's statement was written in York before she had seen Pritchard's register. Her date matches the household entry. Her room was moved to the east corridor by Mr. Venn the day before the thimble appeared. The Dowager's hand tightened around the head of her cane, and I was told she had become unreliable. Elspeth's mouth trembled once. Your Grace, I beg to say goodbye. Augusta's face changed in a way Beatrice had never seen. Not weakness, grief sharpened into anger. Then, this house owes you more than money. Lady Cecily gave a soft, incredulous laugh. Surely we are not making saints of dismissed companions. Beatrice looked at her. No, my lady. We are making witnesses of them. Nell, who had stood near the wall as if she wished the wallpaper could shelter her, stepped forward before courage had time to abandon her. Pritchard moved a fraction nearer but did not touch her. Your Grace, Nell said. Miss Lark told me the shawl would ruin me if I spoke wrong. She said girls without characters shouldn't make themselves seen. The shawl had no coal dust on it. Miss Harrow saw that. Cecily's eyes flashed. A frightened maid repeats what she thinks will please the woman who defended her. Then call Miss Lark, Adrian said. The Marchioness spoke too quickly. She is unwell. She was well enough to search Miss Harrow's chamber, Beatrice said. The Marchioness's face hardened. You have no proof of that. No, Beatrice replied. I have Nell's statement. The searched trunk, the blue silk thread from my drawer, the matching wax, the false letter, the room registers, the wage ledgers, and the fact that every accusation benefited the same few people. The room answered that with silence, because the list had grown too long to dismiss gracefully. Lady Cecily straightened. Her voice changed. The sweetness left it, and in its place came the clipped certainty of rank defending itself. I protected this house from unsuitable influence. That is what no one here has the courage to say. Miss Dane asked questions above her place. Mrs. Harrow meddled with accounts she did not understand. Miss Harrow arrived with clever eyes, a key to private rooms, and a talent for making servants forget the difference between loyalty and insolence. A future Duchess must preserve order. Adrian's face went very still. You were not Duchess, I would have been. And so you practiced by ruining women. I corrected dangers before they grew. The Marchioness caught her daughter's arm. Cecily, enough. But fear had loosened what strategy had kept tied. You know why it had to be secured, the Marchioness said to Adrian, her voice low but audible. The match could not be delayed indefinitely. Fairborn obligations are serious. Once the marriage was announced, these unpleasant matters would have settled. The Marquess turned sharply. Be silent. Too late. The county had heard the word obligations. They had heard marriage as rescue. They had heard why a duke's household had been worth controlling before vows were spoken. Mr. Cresswell looked at Venn. Were you acting under instructions from Lady Cecily? Venn swallowed. I acted in expectation of her coming authority. Lady Cecily turned on him. You acted because you were paid to manage disorder. I was told household adjustments would be overlooked once. Fairborn and Moorcliffe were joined, Venn said, panic making him plain at last. I was told His Grace needn't be troubled with every female complaint. Adrian's voice cut coldly. By whom? Venn looked at Lady Cecily. That was answer enough. Cecily's face emptied of all softness. You fools. Do you imagine houses of this size are kept pure? Every family hides something. I merely had the sense to decide what should remain unseen. Beatrice felt the room turn. Not entirely in kindness. Society did not become moral in an instant. But it had found the direction of power, and power had moved. She stepped toward the table and placed her hand beside the forged letter, not upon it. My name was made evidence against me, she said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. My poverty was made motive. My work was made presumption. My silence was expected to complete the accusation. I ask that my name, and the names of the women before me, be restored before witnesses as public as those who heard the lie. The Dowager closed her eyes briefly. Elspeth covered her mouth with one gloved hand. Nell began to cry without sound. Adrian looked at Beatrice then, and the old distance in him had no place to stand. He turned to the room. The engagement between the House of Valebrook and Lady Cecily Fairborn is ended. Lady Cecily swayed, then recovered by pride alone. The Marchioness gave a sharp cry. The Marquess went rigid. Adrian continued. It is ended because Lady Cecily used the expectation of marriage to claim authority in my household, threaten servants, damage the reputations of women under my mother's protection, assist in the manipulation of wages and records, and frame Miss Beatrice Harrow for theft. You would destroy me publicly, Cecily whispered. You chose public accusation, Adrian said. You will not receive private consequence. He turned slightly, making his next words belong to everyone present. Miss Harrow was wronged under my roof. I privately believed her innocent and publicly failed to protect her. That failure was mine. It will be corrected publicly. Beatrice felt the sentence move through her like air entering a room long sealed. It did not erase the night she had left. It did not mend everything. But it put truth where shame had been placed. Adrian looked to Mr. Cresswell. Written corrections will be sent under my seal to every household represented here, and to every household that may have heard the accusation. Miss Harrow's character is to be restored without qualification. Miss Dane, Mrs. Carrow, Miss Bell, and any maid deprived of wages or references under these arrangements are to receive full repayment and corrected characters in writing. This is debt, not charity, Mr. Cresswell bowed. It shall be done, Your Grace. Adrian faced Venn. You are dismissed from my service. The accounts will be placed before the magistrate through Mr. Cresswell. Until then, you will remain available to answer for them. Venn's hand closed on the chair back. Your Grace, I served your father. Then you dishonored him as well. Pritchard stepped toward the door. No one needed roughness. Exposure had done what force could not have done with half so much dignity. The Marquess bowed stiffly, his face grey, with fury and calculation. We will withdraw. Tonight, Adrian said. Your servants may collect your belongings under Pritchard's supervision. Nothing belonging to this house leaves unexamined. The Fairborn alliance is formally withdrawn. Lady Cecily looked once at Beatrice. Hatred stood clear now, stripped of perfume and silk. Yet beneath it was something worse for her to bear. Recognition. The woman she had tried to make vanish had become the reason everyone was looking. The Fairborns left the drawing room without farewell. Conversations did not resume after the door closed. They could not. The old lie had occupied too much space, and its absence left everyone uncertain where to stand. One by one, the guests withdrew with subdued bows, carrying away a truth they would not be able to make pretty without changing its shape. When at last the room had emptied of county eyes, only the Dowager, Beatrice, Elspeth, Nell, Pritchard, Mr. Cresswell, and Adrian remained. The lamps burned lower. The table was crowded with papers that had returned more than money. They had returned names. Adrian reached into his coat and drew out the cracked brass key. It had been cleaned and mended with a fine line of new metal along the fracture. He placed it on the table between them. I had it repaired, he said quietly, before I knew whether you would return. Beatrice looked at the key, then at him. Why? Because the first thing this house gave you was broken. Silence rested around them, no longer afraid. Adrian did not push the key toward her. I will not ask you to take it tonight. I will not ask you to remain, because I finally did what should have been done sooner. But if you choose to stay long enough to see the repairs made, this door is yours to open or close. Beatrice did not touch the key, not yet. But this time, when Evershade waited for her answer, it waited without command. 3 weeks after the Fairborn carriage left Evershade Hall, the house no longer sounded like a place holding its breath. It did not become joyful all at once. Old walls remembered too much for sudden cheer, and old servants distrusted happiness that arrived too loudly. Yet the change was there. Bells rang without panic. Footsteps no longer stopped at every corner. Nell laughed once in the linen room, and then clapped a hand over her mouth, only for Mrs. Vale to inform her that honest service did not require a funeral expression. Letters had gone out under the Duke's seal to every household that had heard or might repeat the accusation against Miss Beatrice Harrow. Mr. Cresswell wrote with exact legal courtesy, and Adrian added his own hand where rank had carried the original harm. Miss Elspeth Dane received restored wages, a corrected character, and more than one invitation to respectable positions that had previously closed their doors to her. Mrs. Carrow and Miss Bell were found through patient inquiry, their names repaired in writing, and their unpaid sums sent with plain acknowledgement that the money was debt, not favour. Mr. Venn's accounts were placed before the magistrate through Mr. Cresswell, and no servant at Evershade could be dismissed without written review. Justice did not make the past gentle. It made the future less afraid. Beatrice watched Elspeth's carriage leave on a clear morning, not as a frightened woman slipping away before breakfast, but as a guest departing through the front door, with Pritchard's bow, Nell's tearful smile, and the Dowager Duchess's written recommendation in her reticule. When the carriage disappeared beyond the elms, Beatrice stood for a moment longer at the window of the morning room. She felt relief, but not belonging. Relief could be mistaken for home by a woman too tired to know the difference. She would not make that mistake. You intend to leave today, the Dowager said from beside the fire. Beatrice turned. Augusta Valebrook sat wrapped in black, a letter from Miss Bell open upon her lap, and the repaired brass key resting on the small table beside her teacup. The fine line of new metal through the old crack caught the morning light. Yes, Your Grace, you say that as if I have approved it. You have been too wise to forbid it. I am old, not harmless. I can forbid a great deal when properly provoked. Beatrice smiled faintly. Then I shall attempt not to provoke you, too late. You have made me fond of you, and now propose to punish me for it. The words, beneath their sharpness, were too tender. Beatrice looked down at her gloves, still the old mended pair. Adrian had offered to send for new ones from York. She had thanked him and refused. She had not wished every repair in her life to come through his purse. I am grateful beyond what I can say, she said. That is precisely why I must be careful. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. Explain yourself without sounding noble. I have limited patience for noble women before luncheon. If I stay because gratitude has made leaving difficult, then I become dependent in a prettier room. If I stay because Evershade is sorry, then sorrow becomes another kind of claim. I need to know that I may walk away before I decide whether to remain. Augusta was silent for long enough that the fire settled and clicked. And if you walk away because pride has learned to dress as freedom, Beatrice looked at her, then I will have to discover that honestly. The Dowager's mouth trembled, not with weakness, but with restrained feeling. Inconvenient girl. So I have been told. Adrian asked to speak with you before the carriage is brought round. Beatrice's pulse changed. She disliked herself a little for noticing. Did he? Do not pretend indifference. It insults my age. Beatrice crossed to the chair and took the old woman's offered hand. Augusta's fingers were thin and warm. Whatever you choose, the Dowager said, more softly. Do not let what happened here teach you that every open door is a trap. Beatrice held that hand for one breath longer. I will remember, do better than remember. Live as if it may be true. Adrian waited in the morning room when Beatrice entered a few minutes later, standing near the writing table where the evidence had once lain in accusing piles. The room was bright now, no forged letter, no ledger, no sapphire, no county eyes. Only the repaired key upon the table, and the man who had once told his butler she would not last a week. He turned at once. He had not become soft in 3 weeks. Beatrice would not have trusted that. He remained controlled, spare with movement, grave in manner, but his attention had changed. It no longer examined her as an exception to be understood. It met her as a person free to answer no. Miss Harrow, he said, Your Grace, your carriage will be ready within the hour. I have given no instruction beyond that. No escort unless you request one. No purse hidden in the lining. No letter sent ahead to arrange where you will be received. Her mouth almost curved. You have become very obedient. No, merely better instructed. The honesty of it left no place for easy teasing. He looked toward the table. I have no right to ask you to take that key. No, she said. You do not. I have no right to ask you to stay because my mother wishes it. No. Or because the house is quieter when you are in it. No. His eyes returned to hers. Or because I love you. The room seemed to draw still around the words. Beatrice did not move. A lesser man might have stepped toward her, trusting confession to close the distance. Adrian did not. I did not intend to, he said. I did not deserve to. And I know love spoken after injury can sound like another request for forgiveness. I am not asking you to forgive me because I love you. I am not asking you to remain because I have finally done what justice required. The corrections will continue whether you stay or leave. The wages will be paid. The names will remain restored. None of that is the price of your affection. Beatrice looked away toward the window, because if she looked at him too long, her answer might come from longing before judgment had finished its work. Love cannot become ownership, she said, not in this house. Not after I was nearly made grateful for being believed too late. It won't. His voice broke its restraint only in that small contraction. "If you choose me, it will be by your own time and terms. Not as rescue, not as settlement. I would ask for the right to court you openly, with my mother's blessing, your aunt informed, and every propriety observed. If someday that becomes betrothal, it will be because you choose it then, not because I have cornered you today, with repaired keys and remorse." The maturity of the offer struck deeper than a proposal on one knee could have done. He was not offering to make the past vanish. He was offering not to use the future as payment for it. "And if I leave?" she asked. "Then I will write when permitted. I will wait if allowed. I will be silent if asked. I will not turn patience into a debt." Beatrice turned back to him. "You understand that I may not always be easy." Something close to warmth entered his face. "I have come to distrust easy things. I will disagree with you. I am relying upon it. I will expect Evershade to answer to more than tradition. Then Evershade will have the benefit of being improved." She looked at the repaired key, then at his hand resting beside it. Not touching, not claiming. She thought of the night she had left beneath a starless sky, the key in her reticule, and shame trying to follow. She thought of Nell's white face, Elspeth's trembling signature, Augusta's fierce old eyes, and Adrian standing before the county, to say his failure aloud. She thought of the carriage waiting outside. It mattered that it was there. Freedom had to be real before choosing could mean anything. At last, Beatrice picked up the repaired key. The metal was warm from the morning light, not from anyone's possession. "You may court me," she said. Adrian closed his eyes for one brief second, relief moving across his face with such quiet force that it looked almost painful. When he opened them, he did not take her hand until she offered it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she answered. For the first time he smiled, not much, enough to change the room. When the Dowager heard, she declared that sense had arrived in Evershade at last, and demanded tea strong enough to honor the occasion. Pritchard received the news with a bow so exact that Nell later insisted it was the nearest thing to a jig any butler of dignity could perform. The carriage prepared for Beatrice's departure was not hidden or dismissed in shame. It remained until late afternoon, a visible proof that she could still choose the road. Only when the hour came did Beatrice step into the hall, the repaired brass key in her palm, and walk with Adrian to the great front door. "That key was never made for this lock," he said. Beatrice touched the old side latch beneath the main one, half forgotten by family and used for generations by those who kept the house alive. "No," she replied. "But then neither was I." The key turned with a firm, clean sound. The door opened. Evening light spilled over the threshold, gold across stone, warm over places that had once seemed cold beyond mending. Beatrice stepped forward, not as a dismissed companion, not as a grateful dependent, not yet as Duchess, but as a woman choosing the house with her eyes open, and the man beside her unhidden. Behind her, Evershade Hall stood open. Before her, the road remained. For the first time in her life, both felt like freedom.